Welcome, young scholar, to a gentle journey through the corridors of time, where ancient portraits whisper tales of those who once held the highest office at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Tonight, we shall walk softly through 1,000 years of history, meeting the remarkable witches and wizards who shaped the castle's destiny from the shadows of the Headmaster's office. As you settle into your cozy bed, let these stories of wisdom, dedication, and magical legacy carry you through the peaceful hours. Close your eyes and drift into this chronicle of Hogwarts guardians, where every leader left their mark on the castle's living memory. In the mists of ancient Scotland, where magic first learned to dance with stone and mortar, there stands a castle that has known more than a millennium of wisdom, wonder, and careful stewardship. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was born not from the vision of a single mind, but from the collective dreams of 4 extraordinary founders, each bringing their own gifts to create something greater than any could achieve alone. But as the years turned to decades and the decades to centuries, even the most visionary leaders must eventually pass their burden to others willing to carry the flame of knowledge forward. The transition from the founders' era to formal headmastership was neither swift nor simple, unfolding gradually as the practical needs of governing a growing institution demanded more structured leadership than 4 aging wizards could provide, while maintaining their own diverse interests and responsibilities. Godric Gryffindor had his dueling grounds to maintain and brave hearts to inspire. Rowena Ravenclaw pursued her scholarly research into the deepest mysteries of magic itself. Helga Hufflepuff tended her kitchen gardens and ensured that every student, regardless of background or ability, found welcome and nourishment within the castle walls. But it was Salazar Slytherin's departure that truly precipitated the need for change, his self-imposed exile, creating a vacuum in leadership that the remaining founders struggled to fill while managing their own advancing years and competing priorities. The House of Slytherin, left without its founders' direct guidance, required careful management to prevent the ambitious and cunning students from descending into the kind of factional warfare that could tear the school apart from within. The delicate balance of house rivalry that fostered healthy competition while maintaining overall unity demanded attention that the surviving founders found increasingly difficult to provide. Into this need stepped a figure whose name has been lost to history, but whose importance cannot be understated: the first appointed headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. We know of his existence only through the golden brass statue that was erected in his honor, a monument that speaks to both the respect he earned during his tenure and the mystery that surrounds his identity in the modern era. The statue itself is a masterwork of magical craftsmanship, its brass surface gleaming with enchantments that have preserved its luster through centuries of Scottish weather, and the accumulated magic that flows through every stone of the castle. The figure depicted in the statue suggests a wizard of middle years, neither the youth that might indicate inexperience, nor the extreme age that could suggest infirmity, but rather that perfect balance of wisdom and vigor that marks the ideal educational leader. His robes are rendered with exquisite detail, showing the formal dress that would become traditional for Hogwarts headmasters, while his posture conveys both authority and approachability, a man who could command respect from faculty while remaining accessible to students in need of guidance. The decision to honor this unknown headmaster with such a permanent memorial suggests that his contributions to the school's development were both significant and lasting, laying foundations that would support the institution through all the challenges and changes that lay ahead. Perhaps he was the one who established the formal house point system that encouraged competition while teaching valuable lessons about cooperation. Maybe he created the prefect system that allowed older students to take responsibility for younger ones while learning leadership skills themselves. Or possibly, he was the architect of the examination procedures that ensured academic standards while accommodating the diverse learning styles of magical children. What we can say with certainty is that he succeeded where others might have failed, maintaining the delicate balance between the four houses while preserving the unified identity that made Hogwarts more than simply four separate schools sharing a building. The challenges he faced would have tested any leader, managing faculty who had been accustomed to answering only to the founders themselves, establishing precedents for countless administrative decisions that would guide future generations, and somehow finding ways to honor the founders' individual visions while creating policies that served the school as a whole. The brass statue stands today as silent testimony to the success of this first formal leader. Though the centuries have worn away any inscription that might have preserved his name for posterity, students pass by the monument daily, most without truly understanding the significance of the figure it represents, or the debt that their educational experience owes to his unnamed service. But in the deeper magic of Hogwarts itself, his influence remains woven into the very stones, part of the living memory that makes the castle more than mere architecture. The tradition of headmaster portraits that would become such a distinctive feature of the office began during the tenure of Brian Gagwild, whose colourful appearance and mischievous spirit brought a new energy to the role while establishing customs that would endure for centuries. Gagwild's portrait, hanging in the circular office that would become synonymous with Hogwarts leadership, shows us a wizard who refused to be constrained by conventional expectations of dignity and decorum, embracing instead a flamboyant personal style that reflected his belief in the joy and wonder of magical education. His bright orange-coned cap was no mere fashion statement, but a declaration of independence from the somber robes that most educators favored, a visible reminder that learning should be an adventure rather than a burden. The bright green tunic he wore complemented his cap while demonstrating his understanding of color magic and its psychological effects on students and staff alike. The maroon scarf that completed his ensemble was said to be enchanted with warming charms that could comfort troubled students who sought his guidance, though whether this was literal magic or simply the metaphorical warmth of genuine care remains a subject of scholarly debate. The portrait itself reveals details that suggest Gagwild's origins in the British Isles, though whether England, Scotland, or Ireland claimed him as a native son has been lost to the passage of time. What matters more than his birthplace was his contribution to the growing community of educators who made Hogwarts their home, bringing diverse perspectives and experiences that enriched the school's culture while maintaining the high standards that the founders had established. Gagwild's lasting legacy to the wizarding world extended far beyond his administrative duties to encompass his scholarly work on magical mischief and playful spellcasting. His textbook, Jiggery Pokery and Hocus Pocus, published by the respected Luca Books, became an instant classic among students who appreciated its practical approach to the kinds of magic that made daily life more entertaining, if not always more peaceful. The book's focus on mischievous spells filled a genuine need in magical education, acknowledging that young witches and wizards would inevitably experiment with magic that their regular classes didn't cover. Rather than leaving students to discover such spells through potentially dangerous trial and error, Gagwild's textbook provided safe, tested methods for achieving the kinds of harmless pranks that are an essential part of the magical childhood experience. His approach was both practical and ethical, emphasizing the importance of consent and consideration when using magic that might affect others, while teaching valuable lessons about magical control and precision that would serve students well in more advanced studies. The spells contained within Jiggery Pokery and Hocus Pocus ranged from simple, color-changing charms that could turn a rival's hair rainbow hues to more complex illusions that could make it appear as though furniture was dancing on its own. Each spell was carefully explained not only in terms of wand movements and incantations, but also with regard to the underlying magical theory that made such effects possible, ensuring that students understood the principles behind the practice. Gagwild's teaching philosophy, as reflected in both his textbook and his administrative policies, emphasized the importance of joy in magical education. He believed that students who associated magic with fun and wonder would become more accomplished wizards than those who approached their studies with grim determination alone. This perspective influenced his approach to discipline as well, favoring creative consequences that taught lessons while maintaining the kind of good humor that made learning memorable rather than merely punitive. The portrait of Heliotrope Wilkins, who presumably succeeded Gagwild as headmistress, presents us with a figure whose contributions to Hogwarts were more subtle, but no less important than those of her more flamboyant predecessor. Where Gagwild had brought colour and laughter to the role, Wilkins brought steady dedication to the fundamental principles that made Hogwarts extraordinary among magical institutions, particularly the school's commitment to treating all students with equal respect regardless of their gender, blood status, or house affiliation. During Wilkins' era, the contrast between magical and non-magical approaches to education was particularly stark, as the Muggle world of her time maintained strict separations between the education of boys and girls, with opportunities for advanced learning remaining largely the province of males from wealthy families. Hogwarts, under her leadership, continued the founder's revolutionary approach of judging students by their magical ability and character, rather than by accidents of birth or social convention, a policy that seemed radical to many in the broader wizarding community, but proved essential to the school's success. The challenges of maintaining such progressive policies should not be underestimated, as Wilkins faced pressure from influential pure-blood families who expected their traditional privileges to be acknowledged and maintained within the school's walls. Her success in preserving Hogwarts' egalitarian principles, while maintaining the support of the families whose children comprised much of the student body, required diplomatic skills of the highest order, as well as unwavering commitment to the values that made the school special. Wilkins's approach to house management reflected her understanding that equality of opportunity required more than simply treating all students identically, but rather providing each with the specific support and challenges they needed to reach their full potential. She ensured that house competitions remained spirited but fair, that disciplinary policies applied consistently across all 4 houses, and that opportunities for leadership and recognition were distributed based on merit rather than favoritism or political consideration. Her tenure established precedents for countless administrative decisions that would guide future headmasters and headmistresses, though the specific details of her policies have been obscured by the passage of time and the gradual evolution of school procedures. What remains clear is that she successfully bridged the transition from the experimental early years of the school to a more structured institutional framework that could support consistent quality education across generations of students. The portrait tradition that began with Gagwild was formalized during Wilkins' time, establishing the magical procedures that would allow future headmasters to remain active participants in school life even after their deaths. This innovation represented a breakthrough in applied portraiture magic, creating not mere painted likenesses but genuine extensions of the subject's personalities and memories that could continue to serve the school indefinitely. The technical challenges of creating such portraits required collaboration between the school's most skilled artists and its most accomplished magical theorists, developing new techniques that pushed the boundaries of what enchanted paintings could accomplish. The resulting portraits retained not only the visual appearance of their subjects, but also their knowledge, wisdom, and fundamental personality traits. though filtered through the unique perspective that comes from existence as a painted consciousness rather than a living being. The circular office that housed these portraits was redesigned during this period to accommodate what would eventually become dozens of painted headmasters and headmistresses, each capable of providing advice, historical perspective, and continuity of leadership that would prove invaluable during times of crisis or transition. The magical architecture required to support so many active portraits in a single space represented innovations in space expansion and magical energy distribution that would influence castle design throughout the wizarding world. The establishment of formal record-keeping procedures also dates to this era, as the growing complexity of managing a school with multiple houses, diverse curricula, and students from across the magical world demanded more sophisticated administrative systems than the founders' more informal approach could support. Student records, faculty evaluations, financial accounts, and correspondence with the broader wizarding community all required careful organization and magical protection to ensure their accuracy and security. These administrative innovations may seem mundane compared to the dramatic magical discoveries and heroic deeds that typically capture historical attention, but their importance to Hogwarts' long-term success cannot be overstated. The systems established during this foundational period provided the stable framework that allowed the school to weather political upheavals, economic challenges, and even periods of warfare while maintaining its core educational mission. The transition from founders to formal headmasters represented more than a simple change in leadership structure. It marked Hogwarts' evolution from an experimental venture to a permanent institution that could survive the loss of its creators while preserving their essential vision. The unknown first headmaster and his early successors faced the enormous challenge of codifying the founders' informal practices into policies that could guide future generations while remaining flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. The success of these early leaders in meeting that challenge ensured that Hogwarts would become not just a school but a tradition, a living embodiment of the belief that magical education should nurture the whole person rather than simply training spellcasting techniques. Their work laid the foundations for everything that would follow, creating the institutional culture that would produce heroes and leaders, scholars and innovators, protectors and healers throughout the centuries of magical history that lay ahead. As the castle settled into its rhythms under this new form of leadership, the portraits that began to line the headmaster's office served as both inspiration and responsibility for each successive administrator. Future headmasters would look to these painted predecessors for guidance and perspective, understanding that they too would eventually join their ranks in service to an institution larger and more enduring than any individual life. The legacy of these early headmasters lived on not in grand monuments or famous discoveries, but in the countless small decisions and daily actions that shaped the character of everyone who walked Hogwarts corridors. Every student who found welcome regardless of their background, every young witch or wizard who discovered their potential through patient teaching, every graduate who went forth to make the wizarding world better and safer, all owed their opportunities to the careful work of these foundational leaders who chose service over recognition and institution building over personal glory. In the quiet hours when the castle slept and even the ghosts grew still, their portraits would sometimes converse among themselves, sharing memories and perspectives that spanned centuries of magical education. These conversations, overheard occasionally by sleepless headmasters working late in their office, revealed the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing one's work has meaning beyond personal achievement, that the seeds planted in careful administration and thoughtful policy would continue to bear fruit long after the gardener's hand had stilled. The golden statue of the first headmaster continued to gleam in its place of honor, a silent reminder that even unnamed service could achieve immortality through its lasting impact on the lives it touched. Students and faculty who passed by might not know his story, but they walked daily through halls shaped by his vision, learned in classrooms organized according to his policies, and benefited from traditions he had established when Hogwarts was young and the future of magical education remained unwritten. The medieval period of Hogwarts history emerged like dawn, breaking over ancient battlements, illuminating corridors where learning and nobility walked hand in hand through centuries marked by both scholarly achievement and the complex social hierarchies that defined magical society. In these distant years, when castles dotted the Scottish landscape like stone guardians and magic flowed more openly through daily life, the headmasters and headmistresses who guided Hogwarts represented the finest traditions of both academic excellence and aristocratic responsibility, understanding that true leadership required not merely knowledge, but the wisdom to use it in service of others. Among the most remarkable figures to grace the headmaster's office during this era was Philida Spore, a woman whose very presence seemed to embody the intersection of noble bearing and scholarly dedication that would define the medieval approach to magical education. Born into circumstances that provided her with both the resources necessary for extensive learning and the social position that commanded respect from pure-blood families throughout Britain, Spore brought to Hogwarts a combination of intellectual rigor and aristocratic authority that proved essential during a period when the school was establishing its reputation among the most influential wizarding families. Her portrait, which continues to grace the circular office where so many momentous decisions have been made, reveals a woman of striking appearance, whose long black hair frames features that speak of both determination and wisdom earned through years of careful study and administrative responsibility. The dark mole that marks her left cheek became something of a distinguishing characteristic, mentioned in contemporary accounts that describe her as possessing a commanding presence that could silence even the most unruly student council meetings with a single glance, yet tempered by genuine concern for the welfare of every witch and wizard under her care. The resemblance that observers have noted between Philida Spore and certain later figures in Hogwarts history, particularly masters of the potions arts, suggests either coincidental similarity or perhaps some distant familial connection that speaks to the way certain bloodlines seem drawn to the castle's service across the centuries. This physical similarity extended beyond mere appearance to encompass a shared intensity of focus and dedication to the precise sciences that required both intellectual brilliance and meticulous attention to detail, qualities that served Spore well in her administrative duties, as they would later serve others in their chosen specializations. The striking gold brooch that adorned her formal robes was no mere decoration, but a family heirloom that carried both practical and symbolic significance. Its dark purple stone nestled within intricate metalwork that spoke of master craftsmanship from an era when magical jewelry served functions beyond simple ornamentation. The stone itself was rumored to possess protective qualities, warding off certain types of mental influence that might compromise a leader's judgment, though whether this was literal magical effect or simply the confidence that came from wearing symbols of authority and heritage remains a matter of scholarly debate. Spore's most enduring contribution to magical education came through her groundbreaking work in the field of herbology, a discipline that during her era was often dismissed as mere gardening by those who failed to understand the complex magical properties inherent in properly cultivated magical plants. Her comprehensive textbook, 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi, represented years of careful research and experimentation, documenting not only the identification and cultivation of magical plants, but also their complex interactions, seasonal variations, and the precise conditions required for optimal magical potency. The 1,000 species documented in her work were not simply collected from existing sources, but represented original research conducted in the extensive greenhouses that she established throughout the Hogwarts grounds, each climate-controlled environment designed to replicate the specific conditions required by plants from magical ecosystems around the world. From the frost-hardy gillyweed that thrived in the cold waters of Scottish lochs, to the delicate venomous tentacula that required carefully controlled tropical conditions, Spore's gardens became living laboratories where theoretical knowledge met practical application. Her approach to botanical education emphasized the interconnectedness of all magical life, teaching students to understand plants not as isolated specimens, but as components of complex magical ecosystems where each species contributed to the overall magical environment. This holistic understanding proved essential for students who would later work as healers, potions masters, or magical naturalists, providing them with the foundational knowledge necessary to understand how magical herbs retained and expressed their properties under different conditions. The detailed illustrations that accompanied her textbook were masterworks of magical art, created through a collaboration between Spore's scientific observations and the most skilled magical artists of her era. Each drawing was enchanted to show not only the physical appearance of the plants, but also their magical auras as they appeared to those with the sight to perceive such things, providing students with visual references that static illustrations could never match. The moving diagrams demonstrated growth patterns, seasonal changes, and the subtle visual cues that indicated optimal harvesting times for various magical applications. Spore's influence extended far beyond the pages of her textbook to encompass the entire approach to herbology education at Hogwarts, establishing traditions and techniques that would guide the subject for centuries to come. She instituted the practice of requiring students to maintain personal garden plots where they could apply theoretical knowledge under supervised conditions, understanding that botanical mastery required hands-on experience that no amount of reading could provide. These student gardens became testing grounds where young witches and wizards learned not only plant care, but also patience, observation skills, and respect for the natural world. The greenhouse facilities that she expanded and improved during her tenure represented architectural innovations that balanced magical climate control with practical accessibility, creating spaces where dangerous plants could be studied safely, while beneficial species flourished under optimal conditions. The complex ward systems she developed to protect both plants and students from magical accidents became models for similar facilities throughout the wizarding world, demonstrating how careful planning and magical engineering could create educational environments that were both challenging and secure. Her administrative style reflected the same careful attention to detail that characterized her botanical work, establishing record-keeping systems and procedural frameworks that ensured consistent educational quality while accommodating the diverse learning styles and backgrounds of Hogwarts students. She understood that effective leadership in an educational setting required the same patience and long-term thinking that successful gardening demanded, nurturing growth that might not show results for years while maintaining the steady care that healthy development required. The succession from Spore to Odessa Sachtenberg represented a transition from the botanical sciences to historical studies, though both women shared the noble bearing and scholarly dedication that marked the finest medieval headmistresses. Sachtenberg's imposing presence, clearly evident in her portrait, spoke to a different kind of authority than Spore's scientific precision, embodying instead the commanding perspective that came from understanding the sweep of historical events and their implications for contemporary magical society. Sacktenberg's British heritage connected her to the complex political and social currents that flowed through medieval magical society, providing her with insights into the pure-blood family dynamics and traditional power structures that influenced so much of wizarding life during her era. Her understanding of these historical patterns proved invaluable in navigating the delicate relationships between Hogwarts and the influential families whose support was essential for the school's continued prosperity and independence. Her most significant scholarly contribution lay in the field of Muggle history, a subject that during her time was often viewed with suspicion or dismissed as irrelevant by those who believed that magical society should remain completely separate from non-magical concerns. Sacktenberg's vision was broader and more prescient, understanding that the magical world existed within the larger context of human civilization and that comprehending Muggle historical development was essential for wizards who needed to understand the world they lived in, even if they chose not to participate directly in its non-magical aspects. The textbooks she contributed to Muggle historical studies represented groundbreaking work in comparative civilization analysis, examining how magical and non-magical societies had developed along parallel tracks, while occasionally intersecting in ways that influenced both communities. Her research into medieval Muggle political structures provided magical readers with insights into the governmental systems that shaped the world beyond their hidden communities, while her analysis of Muggle technological development helped magical thinkers understand the different approaches to problem-solving that characterized non-magical innovation. Sacktenberg's approach to Muggle studies emphasized the importance of understanding rather than judgment, teaching her students to appreciate the ingenuity and determination that non-magical humans displayed in overcoming challenges without the benefit of magical assistance. This perspective proved particularly valuable for Muggle-born students who needed to understand their heritage within the context of magical education, while also providing pureblood students with broader perspectives on human capability and achievement. The portrait that preserves her memory suggests someone who possessed the kind of natural authority that made even the most rebellious students think twice before challenging her decisions. Yet historical accounts describe her as someone who used that authority with wisdom and restraint, understanding that true leadership meant knowing when to be firm and when to show flexibility. Her administrative policies reflected this balanced approach, maintaining high standards while providing support for students who needed additional help to meet those expectations. Her possible background as a skilled potions master, suggested by both her portrait's details and contemporary references to her expertise in magical brewing, provided her with practical knowledge that enhanced her theoretical understanding of magical education. The precision and attention to safety protocols that characterized advanced potions work translated naturally to administrative oversight, as she applied the same methodical approach to managing school operations that she brought to complex magical formulations. The transition to Fitherly Undercliff brought yet another dimension to medieval Hogwarts leadership, as his appointment marked the rise of a headmaster whose mystical interests and spiritual connections represented a different aspect of magical learning that was particularly valued during an era when the boundaries between magic, religion, were more fluid than they would become in later centuries. Undercliff's appearance, as preserved in his portrait, embodied the archetypal image of the medieval wizard that would influence popular imagination for centuries to come. His massive white beard, flowing like silver water over dark robes that spoke of both authority and wisdom, created an impression of ancient knowledge and patient understanding that reassured parents and impressed students in equal measure. The tall wizard's hat that crowned his appearance was not mere theatrical affectation, but a practical, magical tool, its pointed shape designed to focus and amplify certain types of magical energy while providing protection against mental intrusion and magical eavesdropping that could compromise sensitive administrative deliberations. The dark brown staff that never left his side was clearly more than a walking aid, its polished wood surface carved with symbols that spoke of deep magical significance and practical application in defensive and ceremonial magic. Contemporary accounts describe the staff as being carved from heartwood, taken from a tree that had grown in soil, blessed by ancient druids. Its magical properties enhanced through years of careful cultivation and ritual preparation that made it a powerful focus for the kinds of magic that required connection to natural forces and historical traditions. The ornate rings that adorned his hands were subjects of considerable speculation among students and faculty alike, their intricate designs and precious materials suggesting either family heirlooms passed down through generations of magical practitioners or powerful magical artifacts acquired through study and achievement in specialized magical disciplines. Some accounts describe the rings as tools for specific magical applications, each designed to enhance particular types of spell work or provide protection against specific magical threats that headmasters might encounter in their administrative duties. The golden chain that hung from his belt, supporting a series of smaller rings at its end, created a subtle musical accompaniment to his movements that students learned to recognize as he approached, providing them with warning to compose themselves appropriately while adding an element of ceremony to his official appearances. The magical properties of these rings, whether defensive, ceremonial, or practical in nature, remained subjects of scholarly debate, though their obvious craftsmanship and the care with which Undercliff maintained them suggested significance beyond mere decoration. Undercliff's most intriguing characteristic was his documented connection to Christian angelic orders, a spiritual interest that reflected the complex relationship between magical practice and religious belief that characterized medieval wizarding society. The inscription of all 8 angelic orders above his portrait was not mere religious decoration, but indicated serious study of celestial magic and divine intervention that many magical practitioners of his era considered essential components of complete magical education. This interest in angelic magic reflected a sophisticated understanding of the various sources of power available to magical practitioners, recognizing that the forces traditionally associated with divine intervention could be studied and understood through the same systematic approaches that wizards applied to other magical phenomena. His research into angelic hierarchies and their traditional roles in cosmic order provided him with frameworks for understanding magical power structures and ethical guidelines that influenced both his personal magical practice and his administrative policies. The integration of Christian mystical traditions with practical magical education represented one of the more successful attempts to bridge the gap between magical and religious worldviews that often created tension for wizards who sought to honor both their magical heritage and their spiritual beliefs. Undercliff's approach demonstrated that such integration was possible without compromising either magical effectiveness or spiritual integrity, providing a model that influenced generations of magical practitioners who faced similar philosophical challenges. His administrative tenure was marked by policies that reflected this integrated worldview, emphasizing the importance of ethical magical practice and the responsibility that came with magical power, while maintaining the academic rigor and practical training that students needed for successful magical careers. He instituted regular discussions of magical ethics that drew upon both traditional wizarding wisdom and broader philosophical traditions, helping students understand that magical ability carried moral obligations that extended beyond mere technical competence. The ceremonial aspects of school life flourished under Undercliffe's guidance, as he understood the importance of ritual and tradition in creating shared identity and institutional loyalty among students from diverse backgrounds. The formal procedures for house competitions, graduation ceremonies, and seasonal celebrations that he established provided structure and meaning to the school calendar, while creating opportunities for students to experience the deeper significance of their magical education beyond mere academic achievement. His influence on the physical environment of Hogwarts was equally significant, as he oversaw the installation of stained glass windows and architectural details that reflected his interest in sacred geometry and symbolic representation, understanding that educational environments should inspire and elevate those who learned within them. The chapel spaces he created within the castle provided venues for reflection and spiritual exploration that served students regardless of their specific religious backgrounds, while the meditation gardens he established offered outdoor spaces where the natural world could enhance contemplative practices. The library expansions completed during his tenure reflected his commitment to comprehensive education that honored all forms of knowledge, as he acquired texts on subjects ranging from comparative religion to advanced magical theory, understanding that true wisdom required exposure to diverse perspectives and intellectual traditions. His acquisitions policy emphasized the importance of preserving different viewpoints rather than promoting any single philosophical or magical approach, creating a repository of knowledge that could serve students with widely varying interests and career aspirations. The lasting impact of these medieval headmasters extended far beyond their individual contributions to encompass the establishment of institutional traditions and educational philosophies that would guide Hogwarts through all the centuries that followed. Their collective legacy created a foundation of academic excellence, ethical magical practice, and respect for knowledge in all its forms that became inseparable from the castle's identity and mission. The portraits that preserve their memory continue to offer wisdom and perspective to contemporary headmasters who faced challenges that these medieval leaders could never have imagined. Yet the fundamental principles they established, dedication to student welfare, commitment to academic integrity, and understanding of the sacred responsibility that comes with educational leadership, remain as relevant today as they were in the centuries when magic flowed more openly through the world and the boundaries between scholarship, nobility were defined by character rather than circumstance. Their example reminds us that true leadership in educational settings requires not merely administrative competence or magical ability, but the deeper wisdom that comes from understanding education as a sacred trust, a responsibility to nurture and guide young minds toward their highest potential, while preserving and transmitting the accumulated wisdom of generations. In their quiet dignity and patient dedication, these medieval headmasters demonstrated that the greatest magic lay not in spectacular displays of power, but in the daily choice to serve others with wisdom, compassion, and unwavering commitment to the highest ideals of magical education. The Renaissance period at Hogwarts brought with it winds of change that swept through the ancient corridors like spring air through opened windows, carrying new ideas and perspectives that would reshape magical education, while honoring the timeless traditions that had made the school a beacon of learning throughout the wizarding world. This era of intellectual awakening and cultural transformation found expression in the remarkable leaders who guided the castle through centuries marked by both innovation and reverence for the accumulated wisdom of ages past, each bringing their own unique gifts to the sacred task of nurturing young minds in the magical arts. Among the most extraordinary figures to grace the headmaster's office during this transformative period was Antonia Creaseworthy, a witch whose very existence challenged conventional understanding of magical longevity and whose service to Hogwarts spanned nearly 2 centuries of continuous dedication to educational excellence. Born in 1609, when the wizarding world was still recovering from the upheavals of the previous century and magical society was beginning to establish the more structured institutions that would define its future development, Creaseworthy lived for almost 200 years. Her extended lifespan allowing her to witness and guide transformations in magical education that would have taken multiple generations under normal circumstances. Her remarkable longevity was not merely a biological curiosity, but represented a profound gift to the institution she served, as her accumulated memories and experiences created a living bridge between different eras of magical history that proved invaluable during times of uncertainty and change, where other educational leaders might struggle to understand the historical context of contemporary challenges. Creaseworthy possessed first-hand knowledge of how similar situations had been addressed in the past, what approaches had proven successful, and which strategies had led to unintended consequences that future leaders would need to avoid. The circumstances of her appointment to the position of headmistress reflected the respect and trust that she had earned through decades of dedicated service in various capacities within the school, rising through the ranks from junior instructor to senior professor to administrative leadership through demonstrated competence rather than political maneuvering or family connections. Her progression through the hierarchy provided her with comprehensive understanding of every aspect of school operations, from the practical challenges of managing house rivalries to the complex financial considerations that kept the institution functioning smoothly, despite the various political and economic upheavals that characterized her era. As a noblewoman, Creaseworthy brought to her role the social connections and cultural understanding necessary to navigate the complex relationships between Hogwarts and the influential pure-blood families whose support remained essential for the Immerse school's continued independence and prosperity. Her aristocratic background provided her with insights into the expectations and concerns of parents who entrusted their children to the school's care, while her extended tenure gave her perspective on how those expectations had evolved over time and how they might continue to change in response to broader developments in magical society. The portrait that preserves her memory reveals a woman whose bearing reflected both the dignity of her noble heritage and the wisdom accumulated through decades of educational leadership, her features showing the kind of serene confidence that comes from having successfully navigated countless challenges while maintaining unwavering commitment to the principles that defined her character. The careful attention to detail visible in her clothing and accessories speaks to someone who understood that leadership required attention to symbolism and presentation, recognizing that her appearance and demeanor influenced how students, faculty, and visitors perceived both her personally and the institution she represented. While Creaseworthy's name appears on no published textbooks or scholarly treatises, her contributions to magical education took forms that proved equally valuable and perhaps more enduring than formal academic publications. Her role as the school's living memory transformed her into a unique educational resource, a repository of historical knowledge and institutional wisdom that could provide context and perspective unavailable through any written source. Students and faculty who sought to understand precedents for current situations could consult with her portrait to learn not just what had happened in the past, but how those events had been perceived by those who lived through them. Her remarkable ability to recite news from the Daily Prophet as if recent events had occurred only yesterday reflected not merely exceptional memory, but a deep engagement with the broader magical community that extended far beyond the castle walls. She understood that effective educational leadership required awareness of political, social, and cultural developments, that might influence students' lives after graduation, ensuring that Hogwarts remained relevant to the changing needs of magical society while preserving the timeless values that made the school special. The conversations that visitors could have with Creaseworthy's portrait provided insights into historical events that official records could never capture, as she could describe not just what had happened, but the atmosphere and context that surrounded important developments, the personalities and motivations of key figures, and the unintended consequences that became apparent only with the passage of time. Her perspective on educational policy changes, social movements, and political upheavals provided valuable context for contemporary decision-makers who needed to understand how current challenges compared to similar situations from the past. Her administrative philosophy, developed through decades of practical experience and refined through observation of long-term consequences, emphasized the importance of patience and persistence in educational work, understanding that meaningful change often required years or even decades to fully manifest. She taught her successors to think in terms of generational impact rather than immediate results, recognizing that the most important outcomes of educational policy might not become apparent until students had graduated, established careers, and begun influencing the broader magical community. The transition from Creaseworthy's era to the tenure of Elizabeth Burke marked a significant shift in both administrative approach and institutional culture, as Burke brought to the role a perspective shaped by different priorities and concerns that reflected the changing dynamics of magical society during her time. Burke's leadership was characterized by more pronounced attention to blood status and house affiliations, representing a period when pure blood supremacist ideologies gained influence within certain segments of wizarding society, and when educational institutions faced pressure to acknowledge and accommodate these perspectives. Burke's portrait, which became infamous for its rotating appearances throughout the school, rather than remaining statically positioned in the headmaster's office, embodied the controversial nature of her tenure and the ongoing debate about the appropriate role of blood status considerations in magical education. Her vocal advocacy for pure blood superiority and Slytherin house excellence created divisions within the school community that persisted long after her death, as her portrait continued to express these views to students who encountered it during its travels through various locations within the castle. The rotating portrait system that Burke either established or participated in represented an innovation in magical portraiture that allowed painted consciousness to experience different environments and interact with broader cross-sections of the school community than traditional stationary portraits could achieve. This mobility provided her painted form with opportunities to observe student behavior and institutional dynamics from multiple perspectives, though it also meant that her controversial opinions reached audiences who might not have sought out such interactions if they had remained confined to the headmaster's office. Her outspoken support for Slytherin students and pure-blood ideologies reflected broader tensions within magical society during her era, when economic and political pressures were leading some wizarding families to embrace more exclusionary approaches to magical heritage and social organization. The influence of these ideologies on educational policy created challenges for school administrators who needed to maintain unity among students from diverse backgrounds, while acknowledging the political realities that affected institutional support and funding. Burke's administrative decisions during her tenure appear to have reflected her personal biases in ways that created lasting controversy, though the specific details of her policies have been obscured by the passage of time and the tendency of institutional records to emphasize achievements while downplaying conflicts. What remains clear is that her approach to house management and student discipline created precedents that influenced school culture for decades after her death, contributing to traditions and expectations that later administrators would struggle to modify without causing additional institutional disruption. The portrait's continuing expression of these views, long after Burke's death, raised important questions about the appropriate role of headmaster portraits in ongoing school governance and student interaction, leading to discussions among subsequent administrations about whether painted consciousness should be expected to evolve beyond the perspectives that characterize their living personalities, or whether such evolution would fundamentally alter their nature in ways that diminished their value as historical resources and advisory voices. The appointment of Giffard Abbott as headmaster represented a deliberate effort to restore balance and unity to the school community after the divisiveness of Burke's tenure, his selection reflecting both his personal qualifications and his symbolic value as someone who could represent different aspects of the Hogwarts identity that needed emphasis and restoration. Abbott's background as a Hufflepuff graduate made his appointment particularly significant, as members of that house had rarely risen to the school's highest administrative position despite their consistent contributions to institutional stability and student welfare. The rarity of Hufflepuff headmasters in the school's history reflected not any inadequacy on the part of that house's members, but rather the tendency for leadership positions to go to individuals whose achievements and personalities fit conventional expectations of administrative authority and public recognition. Hufflepuff values of loyalty, hard work, and dedication to service often expressed themselves in ways that were less visible than the dramatic achievements associated with other houses, leading to underrepresentation in prominent positions despite the essential contributions that Hufflepuff graduates made to magical society. Abbott's portrait, which uniquely depicts him alongside a high-shouldered hound, provides insights into both his personal character and his approach to educational leadership that emphasized relationships, loyalty, and the importance of companionship in both personal and professional contexts. The presence of the dog in his official portrait was unprecedented among Hogwarts headmasters, suggesting either exceptional devotion to a beloved pet or recognition that the animal had played some significant role in his administrative duties or personal development. The choice to include the hound in his formal portrait reflected Abbott's understanding that leadership effectiveness often depended on personal relationships and emotional connections, rather than mere administrative competence or magical ability. His approach to school governance appears to have emphasized the importance of creating supportive communities where individuals could develop their potential through encouragement and mutual assistance rather than competitive pressure and hierarchical authority. Contemporary accounts of Abbott's tenure describe him as someone who brought healing and reconciliation to a school community that had been strained by the controversies of previous administrations. His patient and inclusive approach, helping to restore the sense of shared purpose and institutional unity that had made Hogwarts special since its founding. His policies appear to have emphasized collaboration between houses rather than competition, understanding that the school's strength came from diversity of perspectives and talents, rather than dominance by any single faction or ideology. The administrative innovations that Abbott introduced during his tenure reflected his commitment to ensuring that all students could find their place within the school community regardless of their house affiliation, family background, or individual strengths and limitations. He appears to have been particularly concerned with supporting students who struggled academically or socially, understanding that educational institutions had obligations to help every student reach their potential, rather than focusing exclusively on those who showed natural aptitude or came from advantaged backgrounds. His approach to faculty management emphasized collegiality and mutual support, recognizing that effective teaching required environments where instructors could collaborate and learn from each other, rather than competing for recognition or administrative favor. The professional development opportunities he created for staff members reflected his understanding that institutional excellence required ongoing investment in the people who delivered educational services, rather than simply maintaining existing programs and procedures. The legacy of Abbott's canine companion became part of Hogwarts folklore, as students and staff remembered the dog's presence during important school events and its apparent ability to provide comfort to troubled students who encountered it during their time at the castle. Whether the animal possessed any special magical abilities, or simply represented the kind of emotional support that all living creatures could provide, its memory became associated with Abbott's emphasis on the importance of compassion and understanding in educational environments. The portrait conversations that students could have with Abbott's painted form provided them with perspectives on leadership that emphasized service rather than authority, collaboration rather than competition, and the importance of creating communities where everyone could contribute their unique gifts to shared endeavors. His advice to student leaders and his responses to questions about handling conflicts reflected his belief that most problems could be resolved through patient listening, genuine concern for all parties involved, and creative solutions that addressed underlying needs, rather than simply managing surface tensions. The contrast between Abbott's inclusive and healing approach to leadership and the more divisive policies of his predecessor provided valuable lessons for future administrators about the long-term consequences of different administrative philosophies and the importance of considering institutional culture and community cohesion when making policy decisions. His tenure demonstrated that effective leadership often required the courage to change direction when existing approaches were causing harm, even if such changes required acknowledging that previous policies had been misguided or counterproductive. The influence of these Renaissance-era headmasters extended far beyond their individual contributions to encompass fundamental changes in how magical education was conceived and delivered. Their collective legacy, helping to establish Hogwarts as an institution that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining its commitment to excellence and inclusivity. Their portraits continue to provide guidance and perspective to contemporary leaders who face similar challenges in different contexts, offering wisdom gained through experience about the eternal challenges of educational leadership and the timeless principles that guide effective institutional governance. The evolution of the portrait tradition during this period reflected growing sophistication in magical arts and increasing recognition of the value that painted consciousness could provide to ongoing institutional operations. The technical innovations that allowed portraits to rotate between locations, maintain detailed memories of historical events, and provide nuanced advice on complex administrative challenges represented significant advances in applied magic that influenced not only educational institutions, but also governmental and commercial organizations throughout the magical world. The Renaissance transformation of Hogwarts under these leaders established patterns and precedents that would influence the school's development for centuries to come. Their combined wisdom, creating institutional culture that valued both innovation and tradition, individual achievement and community cooperation, magical excellence and ethical responsibility. Their legacy reminds us that educational leadership requires not merely administrative competence, but deep understanding of human nature and unwavering commitment to the highest ideals of learning and personal development. The age that historians would later call the era of mystery and dark knowledge descended upon Hogwarts, like evening mist creeping through ancient valleys, bringing with it headmasters, whose very existence challenged conventional understanding of magical nature and whose scholarly pursuits ventured into territories that most wizards preferred to leave unexplored. This period, spanning several centuries of institutional development, was marked by leaders whose personal mysteries were often as profound as their academic contributions, creating a legacy that would influence both magical education and the broader understanding of what forms magical consciousness could take. Among the most enigmatic figures to occupy the headmaster's office was the wizard known simply as Vulpus, whose very name suggested connections to the wild and untamed aspects of magical existence that civilized society often sought to contain or control. His portrait, which continues to hang in the circular office where so many momentous decisions have been made, presents viewers with an image that raises more questions than it answers, depicting a figure whose appearance suggests influences and afflictions that extend far beyond the normal range of human magical experience. The vampiric characteristics evident in Vulpus's painted visage have sparked centuries of scholarly debate about the nature of his condition and its implications for magical education during his tenure as headmaster. The pale complexion that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it, the elongated canine teeth that hint at dietary requirements beyond normal human sustenance, and the eyes that seem to hold depths of experience that mortal lifespans could not account for, suggests someone whose existence straddled the boundary between human wizard and something altogether more mysterious and potentially dangerous. The questions surrounding Vulpus's true nature extend beyond mere physical characteristics to encompass fundamental issues about the nature of magical consciousness and the criteria for leadership within educational institutions that served young and vulnerable students. If indeed he possessed vampiric qualities, either through birth, curse, or voluntary transformation, his appointment to the highest position at Hogwarts would have required careful consideration of how such characteristics might affect his interactions with students, his decision-making processes, and his ability to serve as a moral exemplar for the impressionable minds under his care. The historical records from Vulpus's era remain frustratingly sparse, whether through deliberate concealment by contemporaries who preferred not to document uncomfortable truths, or through the natural deterioration of documents from a period when magical preservation techniques were less sophisticated than they would later become. What fragmentary evidence survives suggests that his tenure was marked by both extraordinary academic achievements and persistent rumors about his methods and motivations that created an atmosphere of unease within the school community. The administrative challenges that Vulpus faced would have been complicated by the social stigmas and legal restrictions that affected individuals with vampiric characteristics, as magical society of his era maintained strict boundaries between acceptable and unacceptable forms of magical existence. His ability to function effectively as headmaster despite these obstacles speaks to either extraordinary personal qualities that overcame prejudice and suspicion, or to institutional needs that were so pressing that conventional social restrictions had to be overlooked in favor of practical necessity. The portrait's silent presence continues to intrigue visitors to the headmaster's office, as its painted consciousness seems somehow different from the other portraits that line the circular room, possessing a quality of otherness that makes extended contemplation uncomfortable for many viewers. Students and faculty who have attempted to engage the portrait in conversation report responses that are cryptic and unsettling, suggesting awareness and knowledge that extend beyond what normal portraiture magic should be able to preserve or express. The implications of Vulpus's appointment for understanding Hogwarts' approach to diversity and inclusion during this historical period are profound and complex, raising questions about how the institution balanced its commitment to magical excellence with social expectations about appropriate leadership qualities. His presumed success in the role, evidenced by his inclusion among the honored portraits of former headmasters, suggests that whatever unconventional characteristics he possessed were ultimately deemed secondary to his contributions to educational excellence and institutional development. The transition from Vulpus's mysterious tenure to the more extensively documented leadership of Vindictus Viridian brought both relief and new concerns to the Hogwarts community. As Viridian's human nature was unquestionable even as his scholarly interests ventured into areas of magical knowledge that many considered equally dangerous and morally problematic. Born sometime in the 17th century, during a period when magical society was grappling with questions about the appropriate limits of magical research and education, Viridian represented a new generation of magical scholars who believed that knowledge itself could not be inherently evil, regardless of how that knowledge might be misused by those who possessed it. Viridian's appointment to the Hogwarts faculty came through recognition of his extraordinary talents in potion making, a discipline that during his era was evolving from traditional herbalism and alchemy toward the more systematic and scientific approaches that would characterize modern magical brewing. His expertise encompassed not only the technical aspects of combining ingredients and managing brewing processes, but also the theoretical foundations that explained why certain combinations produced specific effects and how those effects could be modified through variations in timing, temperature, and magical channeling. The potions laboratory that Viridian established during his time at Hogwarts represented significant advances in both safety and capability, incorporating design elements that protected students and instructors from dangerous fumes, explosive reactions, and magical contamination, while providing the precise environmental controls that complex brewing required. His innovations in laboratory equipment and procedures became models for similar facilities throughout the magical world, demonstrating how careful planning and magical engineering could create educational environments that expanded learning opportunities while minimizing risks to those who used them. His teaching methods reflected deep understanding of both the practical challenges that students faced when learning complex brewing techniques and the psychological barriers that prevented many from achieving their full potential in a subject that required patience, precision, and confidence in equal measure. Rather than simply demonstrating proper procedures and expecting students to replicate them perfectly, Viridian developed systematic approaches to skill development that helped learners understand the underlying principles that made successful brewing possible. The textbook that would make Viridian infamous throughout the magical world emerged from his conviction that students needed access to comprehensive information about all aspects of magical practice, including those areas that conventional educational philosophy preferred to treat as forbidden knowledge unsuitable for young minds. His decision to author Curses and Counter. Curses, bewitch your friends and befuddle your enemies with the latest revenges. Hair loss, jelly, legs, tongue, tying, and much, much more reflected both his scholarly thoroughness and his somewhat provocative approach to educational boundaries. The comprehensive nature of Viridian's textbook went far beyond simple compilation of existing curse knowledge to encompass original research into magical theory, practical applications, and ethical considerations that most authorities preferred to leave unexamined. His systematic approach to curse classification and analysis provided readers with frameworks for understanding how different types of harmful magic operated, how their effects could be predicted and controlled, and most importantly, how they could be countered or reversed by those who possessed sufficient knowledge and skill. The subtitle of Viridian's work, with its playful reference to bewitching friends and befuddling enemies, reflected his understanding that much of what society classified as dark magic actually encompassed a broad spectrum of magical effects, ranging from harmless pranks to genuinely dangerous attacks. His approach emphasized the importance of understanding context and intent when evaluating magical practices, arguing that the same spell could be either harmless entertainment or serious assault, depending on the circumstances of its use and the relationship between caster and target. The inclusion of specific curses related to hair loss, jelly legs, and tongue-tying in his textbook subtitle indicated his focus on magical effects that were embarrassing and inconvenient rather than permanently harmful, though critics argued that providing students with such knowledge inevitably led to escalation toward more dangerous practices as initial novelty wore off and desire for more dramatic effects grew stronger. The ongoing debate about whether exposure to minor dark magic served as inoculation against more serious temptation or as gateway to increasingly problematic behavior reflected broader philosophical divisions about the appropriate approach to magical education. Viridian's justification for including such controversial material in educational texts centered on his belief that prohibition and ignorance created more dangers than knowledge and understanding, arguing that students who encountered dark magic through official educational channels would be better prepared to recognize and defend against such techniques when they encountered them in less controlled circumstances. His approach represented early adoption of what would later be called the defense through knowledge philosophy that emphasized comprehensive education as the best protection against magical threats. The practical applications that Viridian's textbook provided went beyond simple spell instructions to include detailed analysis of counter curses, protective measures, and detection techniques that could identify when such magic was being used against unwilling victims. His emphasis on defensive applications reflected his understanding that knowledge of offensive magic was most valuable when it contributed to overall magical safety and security, rather than simply enabling mischief or malice. The reception of Viridian's textbook within the magical community revealed deep divisions about appropriate educational content and the responsibilities of magical authors and educators when dealing with potentially dangerous information. Supporters argued that his systematic and scientific approach to curse analysis provided valuable knowledge that enhanced magical safety and understanding, while critics contended that making such information easily available to students inevitably led to increased incidents of magical mischief and potentially more serious conflicts. The long-term influence of Viridian's work extended far beyond its immediate educational applications to encompass broader questions about intellectual freedom, educational philosophy, and the relationship between knowledge and responsibility that would continue to influence magical education for centuries to come. His willingness to address controversial topics directly and comprehensively established precedents for scholarly inquiry that challenged conventional boundaries while maintaining focus on practical applications and ethical considerations. The administrative implications of having a headmaster who authored such controversial material created challenges for Hogwarts' relationship with parents, ministry officials, and other educational institutions that preferred more conservative approaches to magical curriculum development. Viridian's ability to maintain his position, despite criticism of his scholarly work, demonstrated either strong institutional support for academic freedom or recognition that his overall contributions to educational excellence outweighed concerns about specific aspects of his research and writing. The succession from Viridian to Ambrose Swat marked a return to more conventional approaches to educational leadership, though Swat's tenure was characterized by philosophical innovations that proved equally influential in shaping institutional culture and student development. The brevity of historical records concerning Swat's specific achievements and policies reflects the tendency of some highly effective leaders to work behind the scenes, creating systematic improvements and cultural changes that were so thoroughly integrated into institutional operations that they became invisible to casual observation. The inscription Ora et Labora that appears on Swat's portrait provided crucial insights into his educational philosophy and administrative approach, revealing his adoption of principles derived from Benedictine monastic traditions that emphasized the importance of balancing contemplative reflection with practical action. The Latin phrase, meaning pray and work, in its original religious context, was adapted by Swat to encompass the broader educational principle that effective learning required both theoretical study and hands-on application, neither sufficient by itself to produce complete magical education. Swat's embrace of Benedictine wisdom reflected sophisticated understanding of educational psychology and human development that recognized the limitations of purely academic approaches to learning, understanding that students needed opportunities to apply theoretical knowledge in practical contexts if they were to develop genuine competence and confidence in their magical abilities. His policies appear to have emphasized project-based learning, apprenticeship opportunities, and collaborative research that connected classroom instruction to real-world applications and community service. The practical mindset that characterized Swat's approach to educational leadership extended beyond curriculum development to encompass all aspects of school operations, as he sought to create environments where learning occurred through engagement with genuine challenges rather than artificial exercises designed primarily for assessment purposes. His emphasis on honest work reflected his belief that character development was as important as magical skill development, understanding that the wizarding world needed graduates who possessed not only technical competence but also ethical integrity and commitment to serving the broader magical community. The popularity that Swat apparently enjoyed among students suggests that his practical philosophy translated into policies and procedures that students found meaningful and engaging rather than burdensome or arbitrary, creating educational experiences that felt relevant to their future goals and current interests, rather than simply meeting institutional requirements or tradition expectations. His ability to balance high academic standards with practical applicability demonstrated sophisticated understanding of motivation and learning that anticipated many developments in educational theory that would not be formally recognized for centuries. The administrative innovations that Swat introduced during his tenure appear to have focused on creating systems and procedures that functioned efficiently without requiring excessive bureaucratic oversight, reflecting his understanding that educational institutions worked best when administrative structures supported, rather than constrained teaching and learning activities. His approach to faculty management emphasized professional autonomy and collaborative decision-making that respected individual expertise while maintaining institutional coherence and shared commitment to educational excellence. The legacy of Swat's practical philosophy influenced generations of subsequent administrators who adopted his emphasis on balancing contemplation with action, theory with practice, and individual development with community service, creating educational approaches that recognized the complexity of human learning while maintaining focus on practical outcomes and real-world applications. His model of leadership through systematic improvement rather than dramatic innovation, provided a template for sustainable institutional development that avoided the disruption and conflict that often accompanied more radical approaches to educational reform. The cumulative impact of these mysterious and controversial leaders during the Age of Dark Knowledge created a complex legacy that challenged simplistic approaches to magical education, while demonstrating that institutional excellence could be maintained even when leadership included individuals whose backgrounds, methods, or interests diverged significantly from conventional expectations. Their collective contributions established Hogwarts as an institution that valued intellectual courage and scholarly integrity, even when such qualities led to uncomfortable questions or controversial conclusions. The portrait gallery that preserved their memory became a testament to the diversity of approaches and perspectives that had contributed to the school's development over the centuries, providing contemporary leaders and students with visual reminders that effective leadership could take many forms, and that educational excellence required willingness to engage with difficult questions and complex moral issues, rather than simply maintaining comfortable traditions and avoiding controversy. The ongoing presence of these painted consciousness in the headmaster's office ensured that their wisdom and experience remained available to future generations, though the advice they offered often reflected the same complexity and moral ambiguity that had characterized their living careers. Students and faculty who consulted these portraits learned that leadership in educational settings required not only administrative competence and academic knowledge, but also courage to make difficult decisions in circumstances where all available options carried significant risks and potential consequences. The era that these headmasters represented demonstrated that magical education, like all meaningful learning, required engagement with the full spectrum of human experience and magical possibility, including those aspects that society preferred to keep hidden or forbidden. Understanding that comprehensive education demanded honest acknowledgement of both the potential and the dangers that magical knowledge represented for individuals and communities alike. The 18th and early 19th centuries brought to Hogwarts a renaissance of healing arts and scholarly excellence that would transform not only the castle's approach to magical education, but also its relationship with the broader wizarding community. As leaders emerged who understood that true educational excellence required bridges between theoretical learning and practical service to society at large. This era of beloved healers and dedicated scholars created lasting legacies that extended far beyond the castle walls, establishing traditions of community service and professional excellence that would influence magical education and medical practice for generations to come. Among the most revolutionary figures to grace the headmaster's office during this transformative period was Dilys Derwent, whose unprecedented career path from magical healer to educational leader challenged conventional assumptions about the preparation required for academic administration, while demonstrating the profound benefits that practical experience could bring to institutional leadership. Born into a family with strong traditions of service in the healing arts, Derwent's early exposure to the challenges and rewards of magical medicine shaped her understanding of education as fundamentally concerned with preparing students to serve others through the application of their magical gifts and knowledge. Her initial career at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries provided her with experiences that no purely academic background could have supplied, as she witnessed firsthand the consequences of both excellent and inadequate magical education in the real-world situations, where lives depended on the competence and judgment of practicing witches and wizards. The patients she treated included graduates from various magical schools, whose preparation had either equipped them to handle dangerous situations effectively or left them vulnerable to injuries that better education might have prevented, creating in her mind clear connections between educational quality and community welfare. The healing techniques that Derwent mastered during her medical career encompassed far more than simple spell application or potion administration, requiring deep understanding of magical theory, human psychology, and the complex interactions between different magical systems that operated within the human body and mind. Her expertise in diagnostic magic allowed her to identify not only obvious injuries and illnesses, but also the subtle magical imbalances that could develop over time through improper spellcasting, exposure to dangerous magical environments, or psychological trauma that manifested in magical as well as emotional symptoms. The revolutionary aspect of Derwent's medical practice lay in her holistic approach to healing that recognized the interconnections between physical health, magical well-being, and emotional stability, understanding that effective treatment required attention to all aspects of a patient's condition, rather than simply addressing the most obvious symptoms. Her methods incorporated elements drawn from traditional healing wisdom, cutting-edge magical research, and psychological insights that helped patients understand and address the underlying causes of their conditions rather than simply managing their effects. The transition from medical practice to educational leadership was not as dramatic as it might initially appear, as Derwent's experience in healing had provided her with skills and perspectives that proved highly relevant to the challenges of managing a school filled with developing magical minds and personalities. Her understanding of how magical ability developed over time, how psychological stress could affect magical performance, and how individual differences required personalized approaches to treatment translated naturally into educational policies that recognized the unique needs and potential of each student. The appointment of a street, Mungo's healer to the position of headmistress, represented a bold departure from traditional selection criteria that typically favored candidates with extensive academic credentials or administrative experience within educational institutions, reflecting recognition that the challenges facing magical education required leadership with practical understanding of how magical knowledge was applied in professional contexts beyond the academic world. Derwent's selection demonstrated institutional confidence that her medical expertise and service-oriented philosophy would enhance rather than compromise the school's educational mission. The innovations that Derwent introduced during her tenure as headmistress reflected her medical background in their emphasis on prevention, early intervention, and comprehensive support for students who faced academic, social, or personal challenges that could interfere with their educational development. Her policies created systematic approaches to identifying students who needed additional assistance, providing that support in ways that preserved dignity and encouraged continued effort, and connecting classroom, learning to real-world applications that help students understand the practical value of their education. The medical perspective that Derwent brought to educational leadership proved particularly valuable in addressing the psychological and social challenges that affected student well-being and academic performance, as her experience with healing had taught her to recognize the signs of stress, depression, anxiety, and other conditions that could prevent students from reaching their full potential, despite adequate intellectual ability and family support. Her approach to student discipline emphasized understanding and addressing underlying causes rather than simply punishing symptoms, creating interventions that promoted growth and learning rather than merely deterring inappropriate behavior. The collaboration between Hogwarts and Street Mungo's that Derwent facilitated during her tenure created unprecedented opportunities for students interested in healing careers to gain practical experience while still completing their general magical education, establishing internship programs and mentorship relationships that bridge the gap between academic learning and professional practice. These programs provided students with realistic understanding of medical careers, while giving them opportunities to contribute meaningful service to the magical community under proper supervision and guidance. The portrait of Derwent that was installed in both the headmaster's office at Hogwarts and the administrative areas of Street Mungo's represented an innovation in inter-institutional cooperation that allowed her consciousness to continue serving both organizations simultaneously, providing advice and perspective that drew upon her experience in both educational and medical contexts. This dual portrait system created unprecedented opportunities for collaboration between institutions that served different but complementary functions within the broader magical community. The special significance of Derwent's portrait within the headmaster's office reflected not only her personal accomplishments, but also the recognition that her approach to leadership had fundamentally changed how the school understood its relationship to the broader magical community and its responsibilities for preparing students to serve that community effectively. Her emphasis on practical application and community service influenced curriculum development, student evaluation methods, and the criteria used for measuring educational success in ways that persisted long after her tenure ended. The lasting impact that Derwent had on both students and faculty created a legacy of excellence that extended far beyond her formal administrative duties, as those who worked with her carried forward her commitment to combining theoretical knowledge with practical service, her attention to individual needs and circumstances, and her belief that educational institutions should prepare students not merely for personal success, but for meaningful contribution to the welfare of others. The testimonials from colleagues and students who knew her personally consistently emphasized her ability to inspire others to achieve their highest potential while maintaining genuine care for their well-being and development. The transition from Derwent's medically informed leadership to the tenure of Everard brought different but equally valuable qualities to the headmaster's office, as his background and personality represented aspects of educational leadership that complemented rather than duplicated her contributions to institutional development. While specific details of Everard's career and accomplishments remain frustratingly sparse in historical records, the consistent references to him as a beloved and respected headmaster suggest that his approach to leadership created positive experiences for students and faculty that were remembered fondly long after his tenure ended. The portrait of Everard that hangs in the headmaster's office provides valuable clues about the historical period of his service through careful analysis of his clothing and accessories, which reflect the fashion and cultural influences that characterized the late 18th to mid-19th centuries in magical society. His style of hat, which combines practical protection from weather with the formal dignity appropriate to educational leadership, suggests someone who understood the importance of balancing accessibility with authority in his interactions with students, parents, and faculty members. The coat that Everard wears in his portrait displays the kind of careful attention to quality and detail that characterized the clothing choices of successful professional wizards during his era, indicating both personal prosperity and cultural awareness that would have enhanced his effectiveness in representing Hogwarts to the broader magical community. The subtle magical enhancements visible in the fabric and construction of his garments suggest someone who appreciated innovation and quality while maintaining respect for traditional craftsmanship and established social conventions. The mystery surrounding Everard's specific achievements and policies reflects the tendency of some highly effective leaders to work in ways that created positive results without generating dramatic incidents or controversial decisions that would be likely to attract historical attention and documentation. His success in maintaining institutional stability and student satisfaction during a period of broader social and political change suggests administrative skills and interpersonal abilities that enabled him to navigate challenges without creating conflicts that might have disrupted the educational environment. The beloved status that Everard achieved among students and faculty indicates that his leadership style emphasized collaboration, respect, and genuine concern for the welfare of all members of the school community, creating an atmosphere where learning could flourish without the tensions and anxieties that often accompany periods of institutional change or administrative uncertainty. His ability to maintain such positive relationships while upholding academic standards and institutional traditions demonstrates the kind of balanced approach to leadership that creates lasting benefits for educational institutions. The administrative philosophy that appears to have guided Everard's tenure emphasized continuity and gradual improvement rather than dramatic reform. Understanding that educational institutions benefited from stability and predictability that allowed students and faculty to focus on teaching and learning rather than constantly adapting to new policies and procedures. His approach created environments where innovation could occur organically through the initiative of individual faculty members rather than being imposed through top-down administrative mandates that might create resistance or confusion. The influence that Everard had on school culture appears to have been profound but subtle, creating changes in attitudes and expectations that enhanced educational effectiveness without requiring formal policy modifications or structural reorganization. His leadership demonstrated that institutional improvement often resulted from attention to relationships, communication, and shared commitment to educational excellence rather than from dramatic changes in procedures or organizational structure. The succession from Everard to Eupraxia, Mole brought yet another dimension to Hogwarts leadership. As the wizarding world entered a period of rapid change that would test the adaptability and wisdom of magical institutions throughout Britain and beyond, Mole's appointment as headmistress in the late 1800s positioned her to guide the school through transformations that would challenge traditional assumptions about the relationship between magical and non-magical society, while requiring careful balance between innovation and preservation of essential educational values. The era of Mole's leadership coincided with the Muggle world's Second Industrial Revolution, a period of unprecedented technological advancement and social change that created new challenges for magical society as the non-magical world developed capabilities and influences that could no longer be easily dismissed or ignored by those who preferred complete separation between magical and Muggle communities. The steam engines, telegraph systems, and manufacturing processes that were transforming Muggle civilization raised questions about whether magical society should adopt similar approaches to solving practical problems or maintain traditional methods that had served magical communities for centuries. Mole's role as a symbolic brake against the storm of technological change reflected her understanding that magical education needed to preserve essential traditions and values while adapting to new circumstances that required different approaches to preparing students for lives that would be increasingly affected by broader social and economic developments. Her administrative philosophy emphasized the importance of maintaining magical identity and cultural integrity, while providing students with the knowledge and skills they would need to navigate a world where magical and non-magical influences were becoming increasingly intertwined. The challenges that Mole faced during her tenure required diplomatic skills and cultural sensitivity, as she worked to maintain support from pure-blood families who viewed Muggle technological advancement as threat to traditional magical society, while also preparing students for careers and lives that would inevitably be influenced by the broader social changes occurring throughout the British Isles. Her approach appears to have emphasized the unique advantages and responsibilities that came with magical ability, while acknowledging that magical society existed within larger contexts that could not be completely ignored. The curriculum modifications that Mole implemented during her tenure reflected her understanding that magical education needed to address new types of challenges and opportunities, while maintaining focus on the fundamental magical skills and knowledge that remained essential, regardless of external, social changes. Her policies appear to have strengthened traditional magical subjects, while introducing new perspectives on how magical knowledge could be applied to contemporary challenges and how magical communities could maintain their distinct identity while engaging constructively with broader social developments. The administrative decisions that characterized Mole's leadership demonstrated sophisticated understanding of institutional change management, as she worked to implement necessary adaptations while maintaining the stability and continuity that effective education required. Her approach avoided both reactionary rejection of all change and uncritical acceptance of external influences, instead creating thoughtful responses that preserved essential educational values while acknowledging new realities that required attention and preparation. The legacy that these beloved healers and scholars created at Hogwarts established the school as an institution that valued both academic excellence and practical service to the magical community, understanding that true education required preparation for meaningful contribution to the welfare of others, rather than simply personal advancement or professional success. Their collective influence shaped generations of students who carried forward commitments to combining knowledge with service, theoretical understanding with practical application, and individual achievement with community responsibility. The portrait gallery that preserved their memory became a testament to the diverse forms that educational excellence could take, demonstrating that effective leadership required not adherence to any single model or approach, but rather authentic commitment to the highest ideals of magical education combined with wisdom to adapt methods and policies to the specific needs and circumstances of each era. Their painted consciousness continued to provide guidance and inspiration to subsequent generations of students and administrators who faced different challenges but shared similar commitments to educational excellence and community service. The continuing influence of these leaders on contemporary magical education reflects the timeless nature of their core insights about the relationship between knowledge and responsibility, the importance of connecting theoretical learning to practical application, and the need for educational institutions to serve not only their immediate students, but also the broader communities that depended on the graduates they prepared for leadership and service roles throughout magical society. Their legacy reminds us that true educational leadership requires vision that extends beyond immediate institutional concerns to encompass the long-term welfare of the communities that education serves. The dawn of the modern academic era at Hogwarts brought with it a generation of headmasters whose scholarly innovations would fundamentally reshape magical education and establish the theoretical foundations upon which centuries of future learning would be built. These visionary leaders, working during a period when magical knowledge was expanding rapidly and the boundaries between different disciplines were becoming increasingly fluid, created lasting contributions that extended far beyond their administrative duties to encompass groundbreaking research, revolutionary teaching methods, and institutional reforms that would influence magical education throughout the wizarding world. The appointment of Quentin Trimble to the headmaster's position marked a turning point in how magical institutions approached the teaching of defensive magic and the complex moral questions surrounding knowledge of dark arts and BC dangerous magical practices. Trimble's academic background and research interests positioned him uniquely to address the growing recognition that students needed comprehensive education in recognizing and defending against dark magic, even as society grappled with questions about how much knowledge of such practices was appropriate for young witches and wizards to possess. Trimble's expertise in dark magic was not the result of personal attraction to malevolent practices, but rather emerged from his scholarly conviction that effective defense required thorough understanding of the techniques, psychology that characterized dark wizardry, much as healers needed comprehensive knowledge of diseases and injuries in order to treat them effectively. His approach to dark arts education emphasized analytical understanding rather than practical application, teaching students to recognize the signs and patterns that indicated dark magic use while providing them with the theoretical framework necessary to develop effective countermeasures. The revolutionary textbook that would establish Trimble's lasting legacy in magical education emerged from years of careful research and systematic analysis of dark magical practices, representing the first comprehensive attempt to create educational materials that addressed the full spectrum of defensive magic in ways that were both academically rigorous and practically applicable. The Dark Forces, a guide to self-protection, represented a breakthrough in magical pedagogy that balanced the need for comprehensive knowledge with appropriate ethical boundaries and safety considerations. The development of Trimble's textbook required unprecedented collaboration between different areas of magical expertise, as he worked with curse breakers, aurors, healers, and theoretical researchers to ensure that his analysis was both accurate and complete, while remaining suitable for educational use by students who lacked the experience and judgment that professional magical practitioners brought to such dangerous knowledge. The result was a work that provided comprehensive coverage of dark magical threats while emphasizing defensive applications and ethical considerations that helped students understand the broader implications of the knowledge they were acquiring. The systematic approach that Trimble brought to dark arts education reflected his understanding that effective defense required more than simple memorization of counterspells or protective charms, demanding instead comprehensive understanding of the magical theory that explained how dark magic operated, the psychological factors that influenced its use, and the social conditions that allowed it to flourish or be suppressed. His curriculum emphasized critical thinking and moral reasoning alongside practical magical skills, preparing students to make informed decisions about how to respond to threats while maintaining ethical integrity and respect for human dignity. The classification system that Trimble developed for organizing different types of dark magic created lasting frameworks that influenced not only educational approaches, but also legal definitions and enforcement procedures throughout the magical world. His categories distinguish between magic that was inherently harmful regardless of intent, spells that could be used for either beneficial or malevolent purposes depending on circumstances, and practices that violated fundamental ethical principles even when employed with supposedly good intentions. The textbook's emphasis on self-protection rather than offensive applications reflected Trimble's commitment to ensuring that educational exposure to dark arts knowledge served defensive rather than aggressive purposes, providing students with understanding that would help them recognize and protect against threats while avoiding the temptation to use such knowledge for personal advantage or revenge against others. His approach demonstrated that it was possible to provide comprehensive education about dangerous topics without encouraging dangerous behavior, creating precedents for how educational institutions could address controversial subjects responsibly. The practical applications sections of Trimble's textbook provided students with detailed instructions for creating protective wards, recognizing the signs of curse-induced illnesses or behavioral changes, and organizing community responses to dark magical threats that required coordinated action from multiple individuals with different areas of expertise. These sections emphasize the importance of cooperation and communication in defensive magic, teaching students that effective protection often required community effort rather than individual heroics. The long-term influence of Trimble's work extended far beyond his original textbook to encompass the entire approach that magical education would take toward defense against the dark arts for centuries to come, establishing the theoretical foundations and pedagogical methods that would guide countless teachers and students in their efforts to understand and counter the forces of magical malevolence. His systematic and scholarly approach to dangerous topics created models for how educational institutions could address controversial subjects without compromising either academic integrity or moral responsibility. The administrative policies that Trimble implemented during his tenure as headmaster reflected his scholarly approach to institutional governance, emphasizing systematic evaluation and evidence-based decision-making that drew upon research and analysis rather than tradition or personal preference when addressing challenges that affected student welfare and educational effectiveness. His leadership demonstrated how academic expertise could be translated into practical administrative competence without sacrificing the intellectual rigor that characterized excellent scholarship. The faculty development programs that Trimble established during his tenure created opportunities for teachers to enhance their understanding of defensive magic and related subjects, ensuring that the innovations represented by his textbook could be implemented effectively throughout the school rather than remaining limited to his own classes. His approach to professional development emphasized collaborative learning and peer support that helped faculty members share expertise while maintaining high standards for educational quality and student safety. The succession from Trimble's scholarly innovation to the mysterious tenure of Limbert represented one of the more puzzling transitions in Hogwarts administrative history, as the historical record provides tantalizingly few details about someone who appears to have served effectively as headmaster, despite leaving virtually no documentary trace of his specific achievements or policies. The scarcity of information about Limbert's tenure creates fascinating questions about how someone could lead such a prominent institution while remaining so thoroughly absent from historical accounts and contemporary records. The portrait of Limbert that hangs in the headmaster's office provides the primary source of information about his appearance and presumed character, revealing someone who appears to have been unusually young when he assumed the highest administrative position at Hogwarts, suggesting either exceptional qualifications that overcame normal preferences for experienced leaders, or unusual circumstances that required rapid advancement through administrative ranks. His youthful appearance in the portrait raises questions about whether he possessed extraordinary magical abilities, came from influential families that facilitated his advancement, or simply demonstrated administrative competence that impressed senior faculty and institutional governors. The absence of published works, major policy initiatives, or documented conflicts during Limbert's tenure suggests an administrative approach that emphasized continuity and stability rather than innovation or reform, though whether this reflected personal preference for collaborative leadership or simply the absence of circumstances that required dramatic institutional changes remains unclear from available evidence. His apparent success in maintaining institutional functioning without creating memorable incidents or controversies demonstrates that effective leadership sometimes manifests itself through smooth operations rather than dramatic achievements. The mystery surrounding Limbert's background and qualifications reflects broader patterns in magical education history, where individuals sometimes achieved prominent positions through circumstances that were not fully documented by contemporary observers, or were deliberately kept private for political or personal reasons that seemed important at the time, but lost significance as years passed and different concerns captured public attention. The incomplete nature of historical records from earlier periods means that many potentially significant figures remain enigmatic despite their presumed importance to institutional development. The administrative challenges that Limbert would have faced during his tenure, while not specifically documented, can be inferred from broader social and political developments that affected magical education during his era, including ongoing tensions between traditional and progressive approaches to magical instruction, evolving relationships between magical and non-magical communities, and the complex dynamics of managing an institution that served students from diverse backgrounds and prepared them for increasingly varied career paths. The brevity of available information about Limbert's specific contributions to Hogwarts development highlights the importance of systematic record-keeping and historical documentation in preserving institutional memory, as even effective leaders can be forgotten if their achievements are not properly recorded and maintained for future generations. His example serves as a reminder that many individuals who made significant contributions to institutional development may be lost to history simply because their contemporary societies failed to recognize the importance of documenting their work. The transition from Limbert's mysterious tenure to the more extensively documented leadership of Dexter Fortescue brought renewed visibility to Hogwarts administration, while establishing connections between the school and the broader magical commercial community that would prove beneficial for both institutional development and student career preparation. Fortescue's background and family connections provided him with perspectives on magical commerce and entrepreneurship that enhanced the school's ability to prepare students for careers beyond traditional academic or governmental positions. The Fortescue family name carried significant recognition within magical commercial circles, representing traditions of quality craftsmanship and customer service that had built successful businesses over multiple generations, while maintaining reputations for integrity and community involvement that enhanced their social standing and political influence. Dexter Fortescue's appointment to the headmaster position reflected recognition that educational leadership required understanding of economic realities and career preparation that extended beyond purely academic considerations. The family legacy that connected Dexter Fortescue to later commercial enterprises, particularly the famous ice cream establishment operated by Florian Fortescue in Diagon Alley during Harry Potter's era, demonstrated the long-term commitment to service and quality that characterized family traditions and values passed down through multiple generations. Florian's kindness towards students and his willingness to provide both treats and informal education to young customers reflected family values that emphasized community service and genuine care for others' welfare. The tragic fate of Florian Fortescue during the Second Wizarding War, when Voldemort's followers targeted him for reasons that remain unclear, but probably related to his connections to the magical community and his potential knowledge of historical events or personalities, illustrated the dangers that successful business owners faced when dark forces sought to control or eliminate those who represented positive aspects of magical society. His murder represented not only personal tragedy, but also the loss of institutional knowledge and community connections that took generations to develop. The connection between educational leadership and commercial success represented by the Fortescue family legacy demonstrated how magical education could prepare students for diverse career paths while maintaining emphasis on service to others and contribution to community welfare, creating approaches to professional development that balanced personal success with broader social responsibility. Dexter Fortescue's administrative policies appear to have reflected these values through emphasis on practical skills and ethical business practices. The commercial awareness that Dexter Fortescue brought to educational administration proved valuable in managing school finances, developing relationships with suppliers and service providers, and creating opportunities for students to gain practical experience in business-related magical applications that would serve them well regardless of their eventual career choices. His understanding of economic principles and market dynamics enhanced the school's ability to operate efficiently while maintaining high educational standards. The family traditions of hospitality and customer service that characterized Fortescue commercial enterprises translated naturally into educational approaches that emphasized student satisfaction and responsive administration, creating institutional culture that valued individual attention and personalized support while maintaining consistent standards and expectations for all members of the school community. This approach demonstrated how commercial principles could enhance rather than compromise educational excellence. The succession to Basil Fronsack brought to the headmaster's office a figure whose remarkable physical resemblance to future educational leaders suggested either coincidental similarity or family connections that linked him to some of the most revered figures in Hogwarts history, while his academic background in Ravenclaw provided perspectives on intellectual excellence and scholarly achievement that would influence institutional development for decades to come. Fronsack's appearance in his portrait, with half-moon spectacles and flowing grey beard, created visual echoes that would seem almost prophetic when compared to later headmasters who shared similar physical characteristics. The resemblance between Fronsack and Albus Dumbledore, who would not serve as headmaster for nearly 2 centuries after Fronsack's tenure, raises fascinating questions about whether certain physical characteristics were associated with particular types of magical ability or scholarly inclination, or whether the similarity was simply coincidental parallel that demonstrated how certain archetypal images of wisdom and authority persisted across different historical periods and cultural contexts. The Ravenclaw heritage that Fronsack brought to the headmaster's office represented the first documented instance of that house producing a headmaster, establishing precedents for how intellectual excellence and scholarly achievement could translate into effective educational leadership, while demonstrating that administrative competence could emerge from different house traditions and value systems. His appointment validated Ravenclaw approaches to problem-solving and decision-making that emphasized careful analysis and creative thinking. The academic excellence that characterized Fronsack's approach to educational leadership reflected Ravenclaw values that prioritized knowledge for its own sake, while recognizing practical applications that could benefit the broader magical community, creating balance between theoretical learning and practical application that enhanced student preparation for diverse career paths. His policies appear to have emphasized intellectual curiosity and independent thinking, while maintaining structured approaches to skill development and knowledge acquisition. The house favoritism that Fronsack demonstrated toward Ravenclaw students when conflicts or competitions arose reflected natural human tendency to support those who shared similar values and approaches to learning, though historical accounts suggest that his bias was relatively mild and did not create significant problems for students from other houses or compromise overall institutional fairness and educational quality. His leadership demonstrated how personal preferences could be acknowledged while maintaining professional responsibility to serve all students effectively. The tall black hat that Fronsack wore in his portrait represented both practical magical tool and symbolic representation of academic authority. its design reflecting traditional wizard fashion, while incorporating functional elements that enhanced magical performance and provided protection against various forms of magical interference or attack. The careful attention to traditional symbols of authority demonstrated his understanding of the importance of visual representation in educational leadership. The administrative innovations that Fronsac introduced during his tenure appear to have emphasized systematic approaches to curriculum development and student evaluation that reflected Ravenclaw preferences for logical organization and evidence-based decision-making, creating institutional procedures that enhanced educational effectiveness while providing fair and consistent treatment for all students, regardless of their house affiliation or family background. The legacy of these academic innovators established Hogwarts as an institution that valued scholarly excellence and intellectual curiosity, while maintaining practical focus on preparing students for meaningful careers and responsible citizenship within the magical community, creating balance between theoretical knowledge and practical application that would characterize excellent magical education for centuries to come. Their collective contributions demonstrated that educational leadership required not only administrative competence, but also deep understanding of learning processes and genuine commitment to student welfare and development. The portrait gallery that preserved their memory became a repository of wisdom about curriculum development, teaching methods, and institutional governance that continued to provide guidance and inspiration to subsequent generations of educators and administrators who faced different challenges but shared similar commitments to educational excellence and student success. Their painted consciousness offered perspectives on the eternal challenges of balancing innovation with tradition, individual needs with institutional requirements, and academic rigor with practical preparation for life beyond school. The continuing influence of these academic innovators on contemporary magical education reflects the timeless nature of their insights about the relationship between knowledge and wisdom, the importance of connecting theoretical understanding to practical application, and the need for educational institutions to prepare students not only for professional success, but also for meaningful contribution to the welfare of the communities they would serve throughout their lives after graduation. The modern era of Hogwarts leadership emerged during a period of unprecedented expansion in magical knowledge and cultural sophistication, when the wizarding world was discovering new frontiers of learning, while simultaneously seeking to preserve the traditions and values that had sustained magical communities through centuries of challenge and change. The headmasters who guided the school through this transformative period brought diverse talents and interests that reflected the growing complexity of magical society, creating educational environments that prepared students for an increasingly varied and demanding world, while maintaining the essential character that made Hogwarts unique among institutions of magical learning. Walter Aragon's appointment to the headmaster's position represented the rise of a new generation of magical leaders whose intellectual curiosity and diverse accomplishments embodied the Renaissance ideal of comprehensive learning and cultural engagement that was becoming increasingly valued in magical society. Born during the late 19th century, when magical education was expanding beyond traditional boundaries to encompass new disciplines and methodologies, Aragon brought to his role an interdisciplinary approach that recognized the interconnections between different areas of knowledge and the importance of fostering broad intellectual development rather than narrow specialization. The academic pursuits that characterized Aragon's scholarly career demonstrated remarkable breadth and depth of interest that extended far beyond the administrative and pedagogical skills typically associated with educational leadership, encompassing original research in magical zoology, strategic thinking through chess mastery, and literary achievement through published works that contributed to the broader corpus of magical knowledge. His ability to excel in such diverse fields reflected both exceptional intellectual ability and the kind of systematic approach to learning that enabled him to transfer insights and methods between different disciplines. Aragon's expertise in the care of magical creatures represented more than casual interest in magical zoology, but rather serious scholarly engagement with questions about the relationships between magical and non-magical species, the evolutionary development of magical abilities in different creatures, and the ethical responsibilities that wizards bore toward the magical ecosystem that sustained their communities. His research contributed to growing understanding of how magical creatures could be studied and protected, while also recognizing their potential contributions to magical society through carefully managed interaction and cooperation. The groundbreaking textbook that emerged from Aragon's zoological research, Newts of Bognor, represented years of careful field observation and systematic documentation of magical amphibian behavior, habitat requirements, and magical properties that had previously been understood only through folklore and casual observation, rather than rigorous scientific investigation. His work established new standards for magical naturalist research that emphasized empirical observation, controlled experimentation, and systematic classification that enhanced both theoretical understanding and practical applications for magical creature care and management. The specific focus on newt species native to the Bognor region reflected Aragon's understanding that comprehensive knowledge required detailed attention to local ecosystems and environmental conditions that influenced magical creature development and behavior, demonstrating that global understanding of magical zoology needed to be built upon careful study of specific habitats and regional variations. His methodology emphasized the importance of long-term observation and documentation that could reveal patterns and relationships that were not apparent through casual encounter or traditional approaches to creature study. The practical applications of Aragon's newt research extended beyond academic interest to encompass important contributions to potion making, magical medicine, and environmental protection that benefited the broader magical community, while advancing scientific understanding of magical creature biology and ecology. His work provided detailed information about sustainable harvesting practices, breeding programs that could maintain healthy populations, and habitat preservation techniques that balanced human magical needs with creature welfare and environmental integrity. The chess mastery that Aragon achieved alongside his academic pursuits represented more than recreational hobby, but rather serious engagement with strategic thinking and pattern recognition that enhanced his effectiveness in both scholarly, research, and administrative leadership, demonstrating how different intellectual pursuits could reinforce and strengthen each other when approached with systematic dedication and analytical rigor. His chess achievements earned him recognition that extended throughout the magical world and established competitions that would bear his name for generations to come. The Aragon chess competition that was established to honor his memory became one of the most prestigious strategic gaming events in the magical world, attracting participants from multiple countries who competed not only for individual recognition, but also to demonstrate the strategic thinking skills that Aragon had believed were essential for effective leadership in any context. The competition emphasized not only tactical excellence but also the ethical conduct and sportsmanship that Aragon had demonstrated throughout his career, creating lasting tribute to his character as well as his intellectual achievements. The strategic thinking skills that Aragon developed through chess mastery translated directly into his approach to educational administration as he applied systematic analysis and long-term planning to institutional challenges, while maintaining awareness of how individual decisions affected broader patterns of school development and student experience. His administrative style emphasized careful consideration of multiple variables and potential consequences before implementing new policies or procedures, creating stable and effective institutional governance that served students and faculty well. The interdisciplinary approach that characterized Aragon's scholarly work influenced his approach to curriculum development and educational policy, as he recognized that effective magical education required integration between different subjects and awareness of how knowledge from various disciplines could be combined to address complex challenges and opportunities. His policies encouraged faculty, collaboration, and student exploration that crossed traditional subject boundaries while maintaining academic rigor and depth in individual areas of study. The literary achievements that Aragon accomplished through his published works demonstrated communication skills and cultural awareness that enhanced his effectiveness as an educational leader, while contributing to the broader intellectual life of magical society, showing that academic excellence could be combined with public engagement and community service. His writing reflected the same systematic approach and attention to detail that characterized his scientific research, while making specialized knowledge accessible to broader audiences who could benefit from his insights and discoveries. The death of Walter Aragon before 1943 marked the end of an era of expansive intellectual leadership at Hogwarts, while establishing lasting legacies that would influence magical education and scholarship for generations to come, as his diverse achievements demonstrated the possibilities for comprehensive learning and cultural engagement that inspired students and colleagues to pursue their own multidisciplinary interests and contributions to magical knowledge. The memorial portraits that were installed both in the grand staircase and the headmaster's office ensured that his wisdom and experience remained available to future generations who could benefit from his perspectives on education, research, and leadership. The influence that Aragon's interdisciplinary approach had on subsequent educational policy and faculty development created lasting changes in how Hogwarts approached curriculum planning and professional development, encouraging teachers and administrators to maintain broad interests and to seek connections between their specialized knowledge and other areas of magical learning. His example demonstrated that educational excellence required not only depth of expertise, but also breadth of cultural engagement and intellectual curiosity that kept learning alive and relevant throughout career-long service to we, students, and society. The succession to Mordecus Egg brought to the headmaster's office a figure whose scholarly interests represented different but equally important aspects of magical learning, as his expertise in Muggle studies and cultural analysis provided perspectives that were becoming increasingly valuable as magical and non-magical societies continued to develop complex relationships that required understanding, careful management. The questions surrounding Egg's identity and the chronology of his service reflected the complex record-keeping challenges that affected historical documentation of educational leadership during periods of rapid social change and institutional development. The scholarly works that were attributed to Mordecus Egg, including The Philosophy of the Mundane, Why the Muggles Prefer Not to Know, and Cooking the Muggle Way, represented groundbreaking contributions to cross-cultural understanding that addressed fundamental questions about the relationships between magical and non-magical communities, while providing practical guidance for wizards who needed to interact with or understand Muggle society for personal, professional, or political reasons. His approach to Muggle studies emphasized respectful analysis and genuine curiosity, rather than the condescension or dismissal that had characterized earlier approaches to non-magical culture. The philosophical analysis that Egg provided in his examination of Muggle attitudes toward magic represented sophisticated understanding of psychology and cultural dynamics that explained why non-magical people typically rejected evidence of magical phenomena, even when such evidence was presented directly to them. His work explored the cognitive and emotional mechanisms that led Muggles to rationalize away magical experiences, providing insights that were valuable for wizards who needed to maintain secrecy, while also understanding how to interact effectively with non-magical communities. The practical applications of Egg's cultural research extended beyond academic interest to encompass important contributions to international magical relations, law enforcement procedures that involved Muggle interaction, and educational policy that affected Muggle-born students who needed to navigate between magical and non-magical worlds throughout their lives. His work provided frameworks for understanding cultural differences that enhanced diplomatic effectiveness and reduced conflicts that might arise from misunderstanding or inappropriate assumptions about Muggle motivations and capabilities. The culinary research that Egg conducted in his exploration of Muggle cooking methods represented more than casual interest in non-magical food preparation, but rather systematic investigation of how different approaches to nutrition and meal preparation reflected broader cultural values and practical constraints that shaped Muggle daily life in ways that wizards often failed to appreciate or understand. His comparative analysis provided insights into efficiency, resource management, and social organization that had applications beyond cooking to encompass broader questions about lifestyle and community development. The chronological questions that surrounded Egg's service as headmaster reflected broader challenges in maintaining accurate historical records during periods when multiple individuals with similar names and interests were active in educational and scholarly circles, creating potential for confusion about specific achievements and career details that could affect how contributions were understood and credited. The possibility that the headmaster Mordecus Egg was different from the scholar and Muggle studies expert of the same name illustrated the importance of careful documentation and verification in maintaining institutional memory. The appointment of Brutus Scrimgeour to the headmaster's position brought athletic expertise and competitive spirit to educational leadership, while establishing connections between Hogwarts and the broader magical sports community that would enhance student opportunities for physical development and career preparation in areas related to athletic achievement and sports administration. The family connections that linked Brutus to later political figures demonstrated how educational leadership could create networks of influence and expertise that extended across generations and different areas of magical society. The Quidditch expertise that Scrimgeour brought to his role represented more than personal interest in magical athletics, but rather comprehensive understanding of teamwork, strategy, competitive psychology, and physical training that had direct applications to educational leadership and student development, demonstrating how athletic experience could provide valuable preparation for administrative responsibilities and institutional governance. His background as a beater reflected understanding of protective strategies and team coordination that translated naturally into approaches for maintaining school safety and managing complex institutional dynamics. The revolutionary textbook that emerged from Scrimgeour's Quidditch expertise, The Beater's Bible, became the definitive guide for players who sought to master the specialized skills and strategic understanding required for success in one of Quidditch's most demanding and important positions, providing detailed analysis of techniques, tactics, and training methods that had previously been transmitted only through personal instruction and team experience. His systematic approach to athletic instruction created new standards for sports education that influenced coaching and player development throughout the magical world. The strategic insights that Scrimgeour provided in his analysis of beta play emphasized the importance of protective thinking and defensive coordination that served team objectives while enabling individual excellence, demonstrating how competitive success required balance between personal achievement and collective welfare that had broader applications to leadership and community development. His approach to sports education emphasized character development and ethical conduct alongside technical skill and competitive effectiveness. The portrait installations that commemorated Scrimgeour's service throughout Hogwarts Castle reflected both his personal achievements and his understanding of how physical environment and symbolic representation could enhance educational effectiveness and institutional culture, as his portraits served practical functions while also providing inspiration and guidance for students who encountered them during their daily activities. The secret passage hidden behind his trophy room portrait demonstrated how practical utility could be combined with memorial purpose to create lasting benefits for the school community. The password, Beati Pacifici, that protected Scrimgeour's secret passage reflected his understanding of Latin scholarship and philosophical wisdom alongside his athletic expertise, showing how comprehensive education could integrate different areas of knowledge and cultural understanding while serving practical purposes related to school security and student convenience. The choice of "Blessed are the peacemakers" as a protective phrase indicated his commitment to resolving conflicts through understanding and cooperation rather than force or dominance. The family legacy that connected Brutus Scrimgeour to later political leadership demonstrated how educational service could provide preparation for broader civic responsibility while establishing networks of knowledge and experience that benefited magical society through multiple generations of public service. The influence that educational leadership could have on family traditions and career development showed how institutional service created lasting benefits that extended far beyond immediate administrative achievements. The integration of athletic programs with academic instruction that characterized Scrimgeour's approach to educational leadership created opportunities for students to develop physical fitness, competitive skills, and team cooperation alongside traditional magical learning, demonstrating how comprehensive education required attention to multiple aspects of human development and preparation for diverse career paths and life experiences. His policies established precedents for physical education and competitive sports that would influence magical schools throughout the wizarding world. The collective achievements of these modern-era champions established Hogwarts as an institution that valued diverse forms of excellence while maintaining high standards for academic achievement, personal character, and service to the magical community, creating educational approaches that prepared students for increasingly complex and varied career opportunities, while preserving the essential values and traditions that made magical education distinctive and meaningful. Their portraits continue to provide guidance and inspiration for subsequent generations of students and educators who faced different challenges but shared similar commitments to learning, excellence, and community service. The legacy of interdisciplinary scholarship, cultural understanding, and competitive excellence that these leaders established demonstrated how educational institutions could serve as bridges between different areas of magical society, while maintaining focus on fundamental educational mission of developing human potential and preparing citizens for responsible participation in democratic magical communities. Their examples showed how leadership could emerge from diverse backgrounds and experiences while serving common purposes related to learning, growth, and service to others. The continuing influence of these modern champions on contemporary magical education reflects their success in creating institutional cultures that valued both individual achievement and community welfare, demonstrating how educational excellence could be pursued through multiple pathways while maintaining shared commitment to the highest ideals of magical learning and personal development. Their painted consciousness continued to offer wisdom about balance between specialization and breadth, competition and cooperation, innovation and tradition that remained relevant for educators and students who faced similar challenges in different historical contexts. The era of controversial leadership and transformative greatness at Hogwarts unfolded during some of the most turbulent and defining periods in magical history, when the choices made by those who held the highest office in magical education would resonate through generations and shape the very foundations of how wizarding society understood power, responsibility, and the delicate balance between individual ambition and collective welfare. These were times that demanded leaders capable of navigating unprecedented challenges while maintaining the essential educational mission that had sustained the school through centuries of change. Yet the solutions they found often came at costs that would be debated and analysed for decades to come. The appointment of Phineas Nigellus Black to the headmaster's position in the latter half of the 19th century represented one of the most controversial decisions in Hogwarts administrative history, as his selection brought to the castle's highest office a figure whose personal beliefs and family heritage embodied many of the most problematic aspects of pure-blood supremacist ideology that had long created tensions within magical society. Born in 1847 into one of the most notorious pure-blood families in wizarding Britain, Phineas carried with him the accumulated prejudices and assumptions of generations of blacks who had viewed magical ability through the lens of blood purity and social hierarchy. The black family tradition that shaped Phineas's worldview represented centuries of accumulated wealth, political influence, and cultural authority that had been built upon the systematic exclusion and oppression of those deemed inferior by blood status, creating a perspective that saw magical society as naturally hierarchical, with pure-blood families occupying positions of rightful dominance over those of mixed or Muggle heritage. This ideology, while common among certain segments of wizarding aristocracy, created fundamental conflicts with the egalitarian principles that had guided Hogwarts since its founding by 4 individuals who had specifically rejected such distinctions in favor of merit-based selection and evaluation. The Slytherin house placement that Phineas received upon his arrival at Hogwarts as a student reflected both his family expectations and his personal temperament, as the Sorting Hat recognized in him the ambition, cunning, and determination that characterized successful Slytherins, while also acknowledging the more troubling aspects of his character that would later create challenges for his effectiveness as an educational leader. His student years appear to have reinforced rather than challenged his existing prejudices, as he found himself surrounded by like-minded individuals who shared his assumptions about magical hierarchy and social organization. The academic achievement that Phineas demonstrated during his student years provided him with the intellectual credentials necessary for later advancement to teaching positions, though his scholarly interests appear to have focused on areas of magical study that reinforced rather than challenged his existing worldview, particularly those branches of magical theory that could be interpreted as supporting arguments for pure blood superiority or the natural dominance of certain magical bloodlines over others. His graduation around 1865 marked the beginning of a career that would be characterized by the tension between genuine intellectual ability and deeply problematic social attitudes. The marriage that Phineas contracted with Ursula Flint represented an alliance between two prominent pure-blood families that strengthened both his social position and his commitment to the ideological framework that defined his approach to magical society, creating personal relationships and family obligations that reinforced his existing prejudices while providing him with additional resources and connections that would support his eventual rise to educational leadership. The 5 children that resulted from this union would carry forward the Black family traditions, while also inheriting the contradictions and conflicts that characterized their father's approach to magical education and social responsibility. The transition from family obligations to professional teaching that marked the next phase of Phineas's career reflected his understanding that educational service provided opportunities for influence and authority that could serve both personal ambition and ideological commitment, though his approach to classroom instruction appears to have been complicated by his fundamental dislike of the teaching process and his barely concealed contempt for many of his students. The historical record's stark assessment that he hated his job and he hated the children provides insight into the psychological tensions that characterized his professional life. The administrative ascension that eventually brought Phineas to the headmaster's office represented recognition of his intellectual capabilities and organizational skills, despite widespread awareness of his personal limitations and controversial attitudes, suggesting either desperate institutional need for leadership or political pressures that made his appointment unavoidable, regardless of more suitable candidates who might have been available. His elevation to the highest position at Hogwarts created unprecedented challenges for maintaining institutional unity and educational effectiveness while managing a leader whose personal beliefs directly contradicted many of the values that the school had traditionally upheld. The teaching methodology that Phineas employed during his tenure appears to have reflected his personal frustrations and ideological commitments in ways that created lasting negative impacts on student experience and educational outcomes, as his classroom became a venue for expressing his prejudices and disappointments rather than a space dedicated to learning and personal development. Students from families that he deemed inferior by blood status found themselves subjected to dismissive treatment and reduced expectations that could permanently affect their confidence and academic achievement. The administrative policies that Phineas implemented during his tenure as headmaster reflected his attempt to transform Hogwarts into an institution that more closely aligned with his vision of proper magical education, emphasizing the supposed superiority of pure-blood students while creating subtle but persistent barriers to success for those who came from backgrounds that he considered inappropriate or inadequate. These changes, while never formalized into official discrimination, created institutional culture that favored certain students while marginalizing others in ways that contradicted the school's foundational principles. The faculty relationships that developed during Phineas's tenure were complicated by his authoritarian management style and his obvious favoritism toward colleagues who shared his ideological perspectives, creating divisions within the teaching staff that affected educational quality and institutional morale, while making collaborative curriculum development and student support increasingly difficult to achieve effectively. His inability to inspire loyalty or genuine respect among his colleagues limited his effectiveness as an institutional leader, while creating tensions that persisted long after his tenure ended. The student response to Phineas's leadership was overwhelmingly negative, as young witches and wizards from all houses found themselves subjected to a headmaster who viewed education as an opportunity to reinforce social hierarchies rather than develop individual potential, creating learning environments that were characterized more by fear and resentment than by the intellectual curiosity and personal growth that effective education required. The psychological impact of his dismissive and prejudiced approach affected not only immediate educational outcomes, but also long-term attitudes toward learning and institutional authority. The family legacy that would eventually provide the most damning assessment of Phineas's tenure came through his great-great-grandson Sirius Black, whose categorical rejection of family values and specific denunciation of his ancestor as the least liked headmaster Hogwarts ever had reflected both personal knowledge of family history and broader understanding of how Phineas's approach to leadership had failed to serve the Bait institution or its students effectively. This family testimony carried particular weight because it came from someone who had intimate knowledge of Black family traditions while also possessing the independence to evaluate them critically. The portrait that preserved Phineas's consciousness for future generations created ongoing challenges for subsequent administrators who found themselves dealing with a painted former headmaster whose attitudes and advice often contradicted the values that the school sought to promote, creating situations where institutional memory became a source of conflict rather than wisdom and guidance. The continuing presence of his prejudiced perspectives in the headmaster's office required careful management to prevent his influence from undermining contemporary efforts to create inclusive and supportive educational environments. The historical reputation that Phineas achieved through his tenure at Hogwarts served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of allowing personal ideology and social prejudice to override educational principles and institutional mission, demonstrating how even intellectually capable leaders could fail catastrophically when their personal beliefs prevented them from serving all students fairly and effectively. His example provided valuable lessons about the importance of character and values in educational leadership that influenced selection criteria and evaluation procedures for generations of subsequent administrators. The transition from Phineas's controversial tenure to the more successful leadership of Armando Dippet represented both institutional recovery and the beginning of a new era of educational excellence that would ultimately culminate in some of the most significant achievements in Hogwarts history. Though Dippet's own administration would face challenges and make decisions that would have profound consequences for the wizarding world. Born in 1637 during a period when magical society was still developing many of the institutions and traditions that would define its later character, Dippet brought to his role perspectives shaped by centuries of experience and observation. The extraordinary longevity that allowed Dippet to live for 355 years provided him with historical perspective and accumulated wisdom that were virtually unique among magical leaders, as his personal memory encompassed multiple centuries of social, political, and cultural development that gave him insights into long-term patterns and consequences that shorter-lived administrators could never possess. This extended lifespan represented both tremendous asset and potential liability, as his vast experience could inform decision-making while his accumulated attachments to past approaches might prevent adaptation to changing circumstances. The physical decline that eventually characterized Dippet's final years as headmaster, described by Dumbledore as leaving him nearly bald and somewhat feeble, reflected the inevitable consequences of extreme longevity, even for magical individuals whose lifespans far exceeded those of ordinary humans, creating administrative challenges as his physical capabilities diminished while his institutional responsibilities remained constant. The decision about when and how to transition leadership from someone whose experience was irreplaceable became one of the most delicate issues facing the school's governance during this period. The decades-long tenure that Dippet served as headmaster beginning somewhere around 1940 and continuing until possibly the early 1970s, provided institutional stability and continuity during a period of significant social and political upheaval that tested magical society's ability to maintain educational excellence while adapting to changing circumstances and emerging threats. His leadership spanned multiple generations of students and witnessed transformations in magical culture that required careful balance between preserving essential traditions and accommodating necessary changes. The most defining challenge of Dippett's administration came through his oversight of Tom Marvolo Riddle's education at Hogwarts. As the future Dark Lord's presence at the school during the 1930s and 40s created unprecedented difficulties for educational leadership, while testing the institution's ability to identify and address the development of dangerous magical abilities and psychological disturbances in gifted students. The complexity of managing a student whose intellectual brilliance masked growing malevolence required judgment and intervention capabilities that may have exceeded what any educational leader could reasonably be expected to possess. The Chamber of Secrets crisis that erupted during Riddle's time at Hogwarts represented perhaps the greatest challenge that any headmaster had faced since the school's founding, as the mysterious attacks on students created panic and political pressure, while the true source of the danger remained hidden behind carefully constructed deceptions that exploited institutional trust and administrative procedures. Dippett's response to this crisis reflected both the limitations of his understanding and the impossible position created by facing an enemy who was operating from within the school community itself. The decision to expel Rubeus Hagrid for supposedly causing the chamber attacks represented one of the most controversial and consequential administrative decisions in Hogwarts history, as Dippett's acceptance of evidence provided by Tom Riddle led to the punishment of an innocent student while allowing the actual perpetrator to escape consequences and continue his education without scrutiny. This decision demonstrated how even well-intentioned leaders could be manipulated by those skilled in deception and exploitation of institutional processes and personal relationships. The long-term consequences of Hagrid's expulsion extended far beyond the immediate injustice to include the broader implications for institutional credibility and decision-making processes. As the eventual revelation of Riddle's guilt and Hagrid's innocence called into question the reliability of administrative judgment and the adequacy of investigation procedures that had failed to identify the truth despite its enormous importance for student safety and institutional integrity. The psychological impact on Hagrid himself created lasting trauma that affected his relationship with institutional authority and his own sense of worth and belonging within magical society. The portrait that eventually preserved Dippett's consciousness provided him with opportunity to observe the long-term consequences of his administrative decisions, while offering guidance to subsequent leaders who faced similar challenges in identifying and addressing threats that operated through deception and manipulation rather than direct confrontation. His painted form became a repository of hard-won wisdom about the complexities of educational leadership, while also serving as a reminder of how good intentions and extensive experience could prove insufficient when confronting unprecedented forms of evil and manipulation. The institutional memory that Dippet represented through both his living service and his posthumous portrait consciousness created valuable resources for understanding how educational institutions could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining essential mission and values, though his example also demonstrated the dangers of assumptions and the importance of remaining vigilant against threats that might emerge from within trusted communities rather than external enemies. His legacy encompassed both significant achievements in educational leadership and painful lessons about the limitations of traditional approaches to institutional security and student oversight. The transition from Dippet's era to the transformative leadership of Albus Dumbledore, represented perhaps the most significant change in Hogwarts administration since the departure of the founders themselves, as Dumbledore brought to the role unprecedented combinations of magical ability, intellectual brilliance, moral clarity, and deep understanding of human nature that would revolutionize both educational practice and the school's relationship to the broader wizarding world. His appointment marked the beginning of what many would consider the golden age of Hogwarts leadership, though his tenure would also encompass some of the darkest periods in magical history. The philosophical approach that Dumbledore brought to educational leadership represented fundamental departure from traditional authoritarian models of institutional governance, as his belief in the inherent worth and potential of every individual created policies and practices that emphasized personal growth, moral development, and the cultivation of wisdom alongside magical skill and academic achievement. His understanding that education served not merely to transmit knowledge but to develop character and judgment influenced every aspect of school operations, from curriculum design to disciplinary procedures. The transformative impact that Dumbledore had on students who passed through Hogwarts during his tenure reflected his ability to see potential in individuals whom others might dismiss or overlook, providing encouragement and opportunity that allowed countless young witches and wizards to achieve levels of success and contribution that exceeded what conventional assessment might have predicted. His influence extended beyond academic achievement to encompass personal transformation and moral development that prepared students not merely for professional success, but for ethical leadership in their chosen fields. The complex legacy that these controversial and great leaders created at Hogwarts demonstrated both the profound impact that educational leadership could have on individual lives and institutional development, and the enormous responsibilities that came with positions of authority over young minds and developing personalities, showing how the choices made by administrators could resonate through generations, while shaping the character of entire societies and the course of historical events that extended far beyond educational institutions themselves. The final epoch of Hogwarts leadership unfolded during the most momentous and perilous period in magical history, when the choices made by those who held the castle's highest office would determine not merely the quality of education provided to young witches and wizards, but the very survival of the civilized magical world itself. These were decades that tested every assumption about power, wisdom, and moral responsibility, demanding leaders who could navigate unprecedented challenges while preserving the essential values that made magical education not merely training in spellcasting techniques, but preparation for lives dedicated to justice, compassion, and the protection of all who could not protect themselves. The ascension of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore to the Headmaster's office in 1971 marked the beginning of what historians would later recognize as the most transformative period in Hogwarts' thousand-year history, as his unique combination of magical brilliance, philosophical wisdom, and deep understanding of human nature created an educational environment that prepared students not merely for professional success, but for moral leadership in a world increasingly threatened by forces of hatred and destruction. His appointment came at a moment when magical society was beginning to fracture under pressures that conventional educational approaches had proven inadequate to address. The philosophical foundation that guided Dumbledore's approach to educational leadership represented a revolutionary departure from traditional authoritarian models of institutional governance, as his fundamental belief in the inherent worth and unlimited potential of every individual created policies and practices that emphasized personal growth, ethical development, and the cultivation of wisdom alongside technical, magical competence. His understanding that true education served not merely to transmit accumulated knowledge, but to develop character and moral judgment, influenced every aspect of school operations, from the design of curricula that encouraged critical thinking and ethical reasoning, to disciplinary procedures that sought to teach rather than merely punish. The transformative impact that Dumbledore had on the countless students who passed through Hogwarts during his 26-year tenure reflected his extraordinary ability to perceive potential in individuals whom conventional assessment might overlook or dismiss, providing encouragement, opportunity, and guidance that allowed young witches and wizards to achieve levels of personal and professional success that exceeded what their academic records or family backgrounds might have predicted. His influence extended far beyond classroom instruction to encompass the kind of mentorship and moral guidance that shaped character and prepared students for ethical leadership in whatever fields they eventually chose to serve. The international reputation that Dumbledore achieved through his scholarly work, political involvement, and educational leadership made Hogwarts a destination of choice for families throughout the magical world who sought the finest possible education for their children, while his personal relationships with leaders in magical governments, academic institutions, and cultural organizations created opportunities for student exchange, collaborative research, and career placement that enhanced the school's ability to prepare graduates for success in an increasingly interconnected magical community. The specific impact that Dumbledore had on students who would become central figures in the struggle against dark magic demonstrated his prescient understanding of how educational experiences could prepare young people for challenges that had not yet manifested, but would require every resource of courage, wisdom, and moral clarity that proper education could provide. His influence on Tom Riddle, though ultimately unsuccessful in preventing the young man's descent into evil, reflected his commitment to believing in redemption and second chances, even when facing individuals whose choices seemed to lead inevitably toward destruction and malevolence. The relationship that Dumbledore developed with Harry Potter represented perhaps the most crucial mentorship in magical history, as his guidance of the young wizard who would ultimately defeat Voldemort demonstrated how educational leadership could extend beyond institutional boundaries to encompass personal relationships that shaped world historical events, while remaining grounded in fundamental educational principles about human development and moral growth. His patient cultivation of Harry's character and abilities reflected deep understanding of how individual potential could be nurtured to serve purposes larger than personal success. The wartime leadership that Dumbledore provided during both the first and second conflicts with Voldemort demonstrated how educational institutions could serve as centers of resistance against tyranny and oppression, while maintaining their essential mission of teaching and learning, showing that schools could be simultaneously places of peaceful study and training grounds for those who would defend civilization against its enemies. His dual role as headmaster and leader of the Order of the Phoenix illustrated the complex responsibilities that educational leaders might face when broader social crises demanded their involvement in activities that extended far beyond traditional academic concerns. The controversial decisions that marked certain periods of Dumbledore's tenure, including his temporary removal from office during Harry's 5th year, reflected the political pressures and institutional challenges that could affect even the most competent and respected educational leaders when their principles conflicted with governmental authority or popular opinion. His willingness to accept responsibility for student activities that he had not directly authorized demonstrated his understanding that leadership required accountability for consequences as well as credit for achievements. The legacy that Dumbledore created through his educational leadership, encompassed not merely the specific policies and programs that he implemented, but the broader transformation in how magical society understood the purpose and potential of education itself, establishing precedents for institutional service, moral leadership, and the integration of learning with social responsibility that influenced magical schools throughout the wizarding world. His example demonstrated that educational excellence required not merely administrative competence or scholarly achievement, but genuine commitment to human development and social justice that extended beyond institutional boundaries. The tragic circumstances of Dumbledore's death during the height of the Second War against Voldemort created leadership crisis that tested every system and relationship that he had established during his tenure. As the school community struggled to maintain educational effectiveness and institutional identity, while facing unprecedented external threats and internal divisions that challenged the unity and purpose that he had spent decades cultivating through patient leadership and moral example, the period of chaos and oppression that followed Dumbledore's death demonstrated both the strength of the foundations he had established and the vulnerability that any institution faced when deprived of transformative leadership during moments of extreme crisis, as Hogwarts was forced to function under conditions that violated every principle and value that had defined its character, while maintaining the appearance of normal educational operations for students whose safety and well-being depended on preserving some semblance of institutional continuity. The appointment of Dolores Jane Umbridge to the position of Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor in 1995 marked the beginning of the darkest period in Hogwarts' modern history, as her presence at the school represented not merely inadequate teaching but active corruption of educational processes in service of political agendas that prioritized conformity and obedience over learning and critical thinking. Her background as a ministry bureaucrat with no significant teaching experience or educational philosophy beyond enforcing governmental directives created immediate conflicts with faculty colleagues who understood their responsibilities to students rather than to political authorities. The curriculum that Umbridge imposed during her brief tenure as defense professor represented systematic attempt to deprive students of the practical knowledge and skills they would need to protect themselves in an increasingly dangerous, magical world, as her emphasis on theoretical study without practical application deliberately left young witches and wizards vulnerable to threats that ministry officials preferred not to acknowledge or address. Her refusal to teach defensive spells or allow students to practice magical techniques reflected governmental policy that prioritized political control over student welfare and educational effectiveness. The appointment to the newly created position of High Inquisitor that expanded Umbridge's authority beyond her classroom to encompass oversight of other faculty members and evaluation of their teaching methods represented unprecedented governmental interference in educational autonomy, as her investigations and inspections created atmosphere of fear and suspicion that undermined collegial relationships and collaborative approaches to curriculum development and student support that had characterized effective educational practice at Hogwarts. The discovery and destruction of Dumbledore's army, the student organization that Harry Potter had created to provide practical defense training that official curriculum was denying, provided Umbridge with the pretext she needed to force Dumbledore's departure from the school while positioning herself to assume complete control over educational policy and institutional governance. Her willingness to use torture and illegal magical coercion against students who challenged her authority demonstrated the extremes to which authoritarian personalities would go when provided with institutional power and governmental protection. The brief period during which Umbridge served as headmistress following Dumbledore's forced departure created educational environment characterized by fear, surveillance, and systematic oppression that violated every principle of effective teaching and learning, while demonstrating how quickly institutional culture could be corrupted when leadership was assumed by individuals whose primary loyalty was to political authority rather than educational mission or student welfare. Her policies created lasting psychological trauma for students, while damaging faculty, morale, and institutional reputation in ways that required years to repair. The restoration of proper educational leadership following Umbridge's ignominious departure from Hogwarts represented institutional recovery that was both swift and incomplete, as the damage caused by her authoritarian methods and corrupt practices had created wounds that healing required time, patience, and deliberate effort from administrators, faculty, and students who were committed to restoring the values and relationships that made effective education possible. The appointment of Severus Snape to the headmaster's position during the 1997-98 academic year represented perhaps the most complex and morally ambiguous period in the school's administrative history, as his dual loyalty to both Dumbledore's memory and his role as double agent created impossible tensions between his official duties as leader of an institution under Death Eater control and his secret commitment to protecting students from the very forces he appeared to serve. The impossible position that Snape occupied during his tenure required him to maintain credibility with Death Eater overseers, who expected him to implement policies of oppression and violence, while simultaneously working to minimize harm to students and preserve whatever elements of normal educational functioning could be maintained under conditions of occupation and terror. His success in this delicate balancing act reflected both his extraordinary skill in deception and his genuine, though carefully concealed, commitment to student welfare and institutional values. The educational environment that existed during Snape's headmastership was characterized by systematic oppression of Muggle-born students who were banned from attending school, brutal disciplinary methods that employed unforgivable curses as punishment for minor infractions, and curriculum modifications that emphasized dark arts instruction while eliminating subjects that promoted critical thinking or ethical reasoning. These conditions created an atmosphere of terror that was antithetical to everything that effective education required, while testing the courage and resilience of students and faculty who sought to maintain their humanity under impossible circumstances. The faculty colleagues who served under Snape's administration faced daily moral crises as they attempted to protect students while avoiding detection by Death Eater monitors who were positioned throughout the castle to ensure compliance with new policies and to identify resistance activities that might threaten the occupying regime's control. Their success in maintaining underground networks of support and protection for vulnerable students demonstrated the strength of institutional values and personal relationships that had been cultivated during previous administrations. The student resistance that developed during Snape's tenure, led by Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley, and Luna Lovegood, represented the practical application of lessons about courage and moral responsibility that they had learned during previous years of education at Hogwarts, showing how effective teaching could prepare young people to act with integrity, even when facing threats of torture and death for their principles and actions. The duel between Snape and Minerva McGonagall that marked the end of his tenure as headmaster provided dramatic conclusion to one of the most painful periods in the school's history, while demonstrating that even under conditions of occupation and oppression, The fundamental values that defined institutional identity could not be completely suppressed or destroyed by external force or internal betrayal. The assumption of acting headmistress responsibilities by Minerva McGonagall during the final battle that determined the outcome of the Second War represented institutional continuity and recovery that drew upon decades of experience in educational leadership, while facing challenges that exceeded anything in the school's previous history, as she guided the community through combat operations that transformed the castle from place of learning into fortress, defending the future of magical civilization itself. The formal appointment of McGonagall as headmistress following the war's end, and her acceptance of the Order of Merlin First Class from Minister Kingsley Shacklebolt, represented recognition of her extraordinary service during the most difficult period in magical history, while acknowledging the crucial role that educational institutions and their leaders had played in preserving democratic values and cultural traditions against forces that sought to destroy everything that made magical society worth preserving and protecting. The Reconstruction period that McGonagall oversaw during her early years as headmistress required healing of psychological wounds, restoration of damaged facilities, and rebuilding of educational programs that had been corrupted or eliminated during the period of Death Eater occupation, while also adapting to changed circumstances that required new approaches to preparing students for life in a magical world that had been fundamentally transformed by its experience of war and oppression. The curriculum modifications that McGonagall implemented reflected hard-won understanding of how educational programs needed to address the practical and psychological needs of students who had experienced trauma while maintaining academic standards and institutional values that prepared them for productive careers and civic participation in a society that was still recovering from conflict and division. Her policies emphasized both healing and preparation for responsibilities that the next generation would inherit. The transition from wartime leadership to peacetime educational administration that characterized McGonagall's long tenure as headmistress demonstrated how institutional resilience and adaptive capacity could enable schools to serve their communities effectively across dramatically different circumstances, while preserving essential mission and values that transcended particular historical moments or political conditions. Her leadership provided stability and continuity that allowed both institution and broader magical community to recover from trauma while building foundations for future prosperity and security. The legacy of these modern legends encompassed not merely their individual achievements as educational leaders, but their collective demonstration of how institutional service could rise to meet unprecedented challenges while maintaining commitment to human development and moral education that prepared citizens for democracy and civic responsibility in peaceful times, and courageous resistance against tyranny during periods of crisis and conflict. The portrait gallery that would eventually preserve their memory represented more than historical documentation, but living testament to the possibility of principled leadership under conditions of extreme pressure, showing future generations of students and educators that integrity and courage could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles when supported by genuine commitment to educational values and human dignity that transcended personal ambition or political expediency. The continuing influence of these leaders on contemporary magical education reflects the timeless nature of their insights about the relationship between learning and character development, the importance of institutional autonomy and academic freedom, and the responsibility that educational leaders bear for preparing students, not merely for professional success, but for moral leadership in whatever challenges their generation would face in years and decades ahead. As our journey through Hogwarts' illustrious history draws to its gentle close, rest easy knowing that the castle's walls have been watched over by minds both brilliant and dedicated, each contributing their own magic to the tapestry of education and wonder. From the mysterious first headmaster's golden statue to McGonagall's steady hand rebuilding after war, each portrait hanging in that circular office represents a life devoted to nurturing young witches and wizards. Their wisdom echoes through the moving staircases and enchanted corridors, their care woven into the very stones of the castle. Sleep now, young dreamer, and may your rest be filled with the peaceful knowledge that Hogwarts endures, its leadership passed like a sacred torch from one devoted guardian to the next. In your dreams, perhaps you'll walk those portrait-lined walls yourself, seeing the painted faces nod in recognition of another soul who understands the magic of learning and the power of dedication. Sweet dreams, and remember that somewhere in the Scottish Highlands, the castle lights still burn, tended by those who follow in the footsteps of legends.